Hey guys, tonight we're traveling to the coldest permanently inhabited place on Earth. A land so brutally frozen that your eyelashes ice over in seconds, where spit freezes before it hits the ground, and where the vegetables in your kitchen are literally harder than the cutting board you're trying to chop them on. Welcome to Yakutia in Russia's Far East, where the temperature has dropped to a bone-shattering -71°C -96°F, and where simply cooking dinner becomes an expedition into the surreal physics of extreme cold. You're standing outside right now, and honestly, you probably won't survive this for more than a few minutes without proper gear. The cold doesn't just bite. It attacks with a ferocity that turns moisture in your lungs to ice crystals, that makes metal burn your skin on contact, that transforms the simple act of breathing into a calculated risk. This is Yakutia, specifically the town of Oymyakon, holder of the Northern Hemisphere's cold temperature record. Where winter lasts 8 months and summer is that cute 3-week period when things only drop to -40°C at night. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Are you in sunny California at noon? Rainy London at midnight? I love seeing how this little community spans the globe, all of us gathered here in the quiet hours. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just arrived in Yakutsk, the regional capital, after a flight that felt like traveling to another planet. The plane's landing gear hits the runway, a runway built on permafrost that never, ever thaws, even 1,000 feet down. You step out of the airport and the cold hits you like a physical wall. Your nose hairs freeze instantly. It's actually kind of funny, this little crackling sensation, until you realize that your body is frantically trying to tell you that you're in danger. The moisture in your breath crystallizes into a cloud of ice fog that locals call the whisper of stars, because of how it glitters in the weak winter sunlight. Your taxi driver, Dmitry, is wearing a fur hat that would make a 1970s pimp jealous. It's traditional Yakut headwear, and it's not a fashion statement, it's engineering. The fur is positioned in specific directions to create air pockets that trap warmth. "First time?" he asks in heavily accented English, grinning at your inadequate North Face jacket. You nod, teeth already chattering. "You need better coat," he laughs, not unkindly. "Here, cold is not weather. Cold is how you say personality of place." The city slides past your frosted window. Yakutsk is home to about 300,000 people who have collectively decided that -50°C winters are just fine. Thank you very much. The buildings look like they're on stilts, and they are. Construction here is its own special nightmare because you can't just pour a foundation into ground that's permanently frozen. The heat from a normal building would melt the permafrost beneath it, causing it to sink and collapse. So everything sits on adjustable concrete or steel piles driven deep into the frozen earth, with space underneath for air circulation. It gives the whole city this strange, hovering quality, like it's not quite committed to touching the ground. You're heading to stay with a local family, the Ivanovs, who've agreed to teach you how people actually live, cook, and eat in these conditions. Their home is a mixture of traditional Yakut design and Soviet-era practicality, sitting on the outskirts of the city where the urban grid starts dissolving into the vast Siberian wilderness. As Dmitry's ancient Lada crunches over snow so cold it squeaks under the tires, you notice something strange. There are no outdoor markets, no street vendors, no one casually strolling anywhere. At -45°C, today is apparently a warm day. You've got maybe 15 minutes of exposure before frostbite starts making permanent decisions about your fingers and toes. The Ivanovs' home appears through the ice fog, a sturdy structure with walls so thick they'd make a medieval castle jealous. Smoke rises from the chimney in a perfectly straight column. It's too cold for it to dissipate normally. Elena Ivanova, the family matriarch, opens the door and ushers you inside quickly, muttering something in Yakut. Her daughter, Sasha, translates. She says you let out all the warm. Come, come. Inside, it's gloriously, almost oppressively hot, around 25°C. The temperature differential between inside and outside is 70 degrees. 70. Your glasses fog instantly, and you can't see anything for a solid minute. When your vision clears, you're standing in a mudroom that's essentially an airlock. 2 doors with space between them stuffed with coats that look like they could survive Arctic exploration. Which, to be fair, they basically have to. Take off boots here, Sasha instructs. Don't bring cold inside. Cold is sticky. It follows. You're led into the main living area, and this is where you first start to understand that cooking in Yakutia isn't just about recipes. It's about heat management, architecture, and the fundamental restructuring of what food storage means. The kitchen occupies the heart of the home, literally. The massive wood-burning stove, a traditional Yakut kotan, radiates heat that's been carefully calculated to warm the entire dwelling. It's not just where they cook. It's the sun of this small domestic solar system, and everything orbits around it. Elena gestures for you to sit at a heavy wooden table. She's preparing an afternoon snack, and you watch as she moves to what appears to be a pantry. But when she opens the door, you realize you're looking at something both incredibly simple and brilliantly adapted to this environment. A storage room that isn't heated at all. It's basically refrigerator temperature in there. No, wait, it's colder than that. Much colder. Because outside it's minus 45 degrees Celsius, and even with the home's insulation, this unheated space hovers somewhere around minus 15 degrees Celsius to minus 20 degrees Celsius. This is your first introduction to the Yakut approach to food preservation. Why build a freezer when the entire outside world is a freezer for 8 months of the year? Elena pulls out what looks like a bag of rocks. She brings it to the table and empties it, and you realize you're looking at potatoes. Except they're frozen so solid that when one rolls off the table and hits the floor, it makes a sound like a hockey puck. She picks it up, completely unbothered, and adds it to the pile. These aren't just cold potatoes. These are potatoes that have been stored at temperatures that would destroy them in a normal freezer, where the slow freeze causes ice crystals to rupture cell walls and turn them to mush upon thawing. But here's where it gets interesting. These potatoes were frozen fast. When the temperature outside drops to minus 50 degrees Celsius or below, the freezing process is so rapid that ice crystals don't have time to form the large, destructive structures they would in your kitchen freezer set to a balmy minus 18 degrees Celsius. It's the same principle behind flash freezing in industrial food processing, except Yakutians figured it out about 2,000 years before Clarence Birdseye came along with his patents. In October, Sasha explains, we take all vegetables from summer, potatoes, carrots, beets, cabbage, and we put outside. 1 night, maybe 2 nights in the first big freeze. Then we bring inside to the cold room. They stay good all winter, sometimes into next summer even. Elena is now doing something that looks completely insane. She's running a frozen potato under warm water from the kettle. Not hot water, warm water. The potato starts to sweat as a thin layer of ice on its surface melts, and she quickly pats it dry and sets it aside. She does this with 5 or 6 potatoes, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who's performed this ritual 10,000 times. You cannot cook frozen potato directly, Sasha continues, translating her mother's commentary. Well, you can, but it takes forever and cooks uneven. So we wake them up a little. Gentle, gentle, like waking a baby. Historians generally agree that the Yakut people, also called the Saka, migrated to this region from areas around Lake Baikal sometime between the 13th and 15th centuries, though some archaeological evidence suggests human habitation in the region going back much further. What's remarkable is that they didn't just survive here. They developed a sophisticated culture with complex food preservation and preparation techniques that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would kill most people within hours. While Elena works, you notice something else peculiar. There's a whole dried fish hanging from a hook near the ceiling. Several, actually, and what looks like frozen slabs of meat stacked in the corner of the cold room like cordwood. The Yakut diet traditionally centered on horses, cattle, fish, and game, because, let's be honest, you're not growing much grain at these latitudes. But they supplemented with whatever vegetables they could cultivate during the brief, frenzied summer, and then they preserved everything with the most reliable preservation method known to humanity, making it colder than a witch's heart in a brass bra. The potatoes Elena treated are now sitting on a cloth, slowly coming to something approaching room temperature. Maybe 30 minutes, 1 hour, Sasha says. Then we can cut them. If you try to cut frozen potato, She makes a chopping motion and a face suggesting disaster. Knife can slip. Potato can break wrong. Maybe you lose finger. Cold makes everything unpredictable. You're offered tea, proper Russian tea, black and strong, served in a glass with a metal holder. It's so hot it nearly burns your tongue, and you understand that every hot drink here is served at temperatures that would violate health codes elsewhere. But when the alternative is stepping outside into minus 45 degrees Celsius, you need all the internal warmth you can get. The contrast is what survival tastes like in Yakutia. Scalding tea in your hands, ice fog outside the triple-paned windows. Elena says something, and Sasha translates with a smile. My mother asks if you've ever tried salamat. It's traditional Yakut. Like porridge? Made from flour and sour cream and butter, cooked on the stove until it's thick. Very high calories. In winter, you need maybe 4,000, 5,000 calories per day just to keep warm. Your modern brain immediately thinks about heart disease, but then you remember, these people are living in an environment that requires constant caloric furnace stoking just to maintain core body temperature. The rules are different here. The human body in Yakutia burns through energy like a coal power plant, and traditional Yakut cuisine evolved to match that demand. There's a sound from the cold storage room, a kind of creaking, settling noise. Frost, Sasha explains casually. The walls, they adjust when temperature changes. Always talking, the house. You'll hear it at night. Don't worry, it's normal. You're beginning to understand that nothing about life here is normal by outside standards. But everything has been normalized through centuries of adaptation. The frozen vegetables, the cold rooms, the architectural peculiarities, the 5,000-calorie diets. It's all part of an interconnected system of survival that's been refined over generations. Elena has now started actually preparing dinner, and you watch as she brings out more frozen vegetables. Carrots that look like orange clubs, beets that could double as paperweights, and a whole frozen cabbage that she handles with two hands like it's a bowling ball. She sets them near, but not on, the stove in a specific zone that you're starting to recognize as the thawing area. Everything has its place in the thermal geography of this kitchen. Tonight, Sasha announces, we make salad olivier and borscht. You know these. You nod. Russian salad and beet soup, comfort food across the former Soviet Union. But Yakutian way, she adds with a grin, everything starts frozen. Even the recipes are patient here. You need to wait a bit longer to truly appreciate what patient recipes means, but you're already learning the first fundamental rule of Yakutian cooking. Respect the cold. It's not your enemy. It's been keeping these vegetables fresh since October, and now, in February, you're going to eat like it's still harvest season. The cold is a preservation technology so effective that your ancestors would have waged wars to possess it. Outside, the sun is starting to set even though it's only 3 p.m. Winter daylight here lasts maybe 4 hours on a good day. The ice fog is getting thicker, and through the window, you can see a neighbor's chimney smoke rising in that eerie, perfectly straight line. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks. Yakut Lycus, probably, the local breed that's adapted to sleep comfortably outside even in these temperatures, curled up with their thick tails wrapped around their noses. Elena starts working on the cabbage, and you notice she's not trying to cut it yet. Instead, she's placed it in a large basin and is pouring lukewarm water over it, rotating it like she's baptizing it. The outer leaves first, Sasha explains. When they soften just a little, she peels them away. Then more water for the next layer. You cannot rush this. Russian saying, hurry is only good for catching fleas. You sip your tea and watch this slow ritual of thawing. It occurs to you that everything about cooking in Yakutia involves a fundamental restructuring of time. In your normal life, frozen vegetables mean convenience. Grab a bag from the freezer, dump them in a pot, dinner in 15 minutes. Here, frozen vegetables mean planning, foresight, patience. The entire rhythm of food preparation moves to a different beat, one governed by the physics of extreme cold and the biology of how plant cells survive freezing. There's something meditative about it, watching Elena's practiced hands work through the cabbage layers, listening to the stove crackle, feeling the heat on your face while knowing that just beyond those thick walls, the world is cold enough to kill you. This is cooking as survival art, and you're only just beginning to learn its principles. The potatoes she set out earlier are ready now. She picks one up, gives it an approving squeeze, it has some give to it now, some flexibility, and begins to peel it. The peel comes off in smooth ribbons, and the potato beneath looks perfect. No mush, no weird discoloration, just a potato, waiting to become part of dinner, as if it hasn't spent the last 4 months frozen harder than stone. Good, yes? Sasha asks, watching your face. You nod, genuinely impressed. This is Yakutian technology, she says proudly. No electricity, no fancy freezer, just cold and knowing how to use it. My great-great-grandmother cooked same way. My great-great-great-grandmother before her. Same vegetables, same winter, same cold. We are not fighting Yakutia, we are dancing with it. And as Elena begins to dice the now pliable potatoes with swift, confident cuts, you realize that you're about to learn steps to a dance that's been performed for centuries, in the coldest inhabited corner of our planet, where dinner doesn't come from a store. It comes from understanding how to coax life back into vegetables that were dead frozen before you were born. The stove is the beating heart of survival here, and you're starting to understand why it occupies the central position in every traditional Yakut home. This isn't some quaint cultural preference, it's thermodynamic necessity dressed up as architecture. Elena keeps feeding it split logs of larch, the dominant tree in the Siberian taiga, and the heat radiates outward in carefully calculated waves that have been warming Yakut families for centuries. You move closer to examine the stove itself, this kotan that Elena treats with something approaching reverence. It's massive, easily 5 feet wide and almost as tall, built from firebrick and clay in a design that maximizes heat retention and distribution. Unlike the quick-burning stoves you might see elsewhere, this is engineered for the long game. A single morning fire, properly laid, can keep the house warm for 12 hours or more. The bricks absorb heat and release it slowly, turning the stove into a thermal battery that outlasts the flames themselves. My grandfather built this one, Sasha tells you, running her hand along the whitewashed exterior. 1967. Before that was old one from maybe 1930s. When you build stove in Yakutia, you build for generations. Bad stove means cold house. Cold house means she doesn't finish the sentence. She doesn't need to. The layout of the rooms makes more sense now that you understand the heat distribution strategy. The kitchen and main living area occupy the center, wrapped by the cold storage room on one side and the bedrooms on the other. It's like a thermal sandwich, with the hottest zone in the middle and progressively cooler zones radiating outward. The bedrooms are warm enough to sleep comfortably, around 18 degrees Celsius, but they're not the inferno that the kitchen maintains. This graduated temperature system saves fuel and creates microclimates within the home that serve different purposes. Historians still argue whether the Yakut people developed their sophisticated housing techniques independently or adapted them from earlier inhabitants of the region, but archaeological evidence from sites like the Diringiriak suggests humans have been surviving Siberian winters for potentially hundreds of thousands of years. The techniques evolved, certainly, but the core principle remained constant. Create a warm fortress in a frozen wasteland, and make every joule of heat energy work as hard as possible. You notice that even the windows are part of this thermal management system. Triple-paned, with the outer pane actually removable in summer to allow for better ventilation. Right now, though, they're sealed tight, and the frost on the outside pane has created these gorgeous fractal patterns. Ice crystals growing in the mathematical precision that cold encourages. The inside pane is clear and warm. The middle pane sits in a buffer zone. 3 layers of glass creating 2 insulating air gaps, pioneered here long before modern architecture caught up with the concept. Elena has moved on to the carrots now, treating them with the same ritualistic patience she gave the potatoes. These she's placed in a bowl of cool, not warm water, and they sit there like orange submarines, slowly coming back to a state where they won't shatter under a knife blade. Carrots are delicate, Sasha explains. Too warm water, too fast, and they go. She makes a squishing motion with her hands. Mushy. The cells, they rupture. You want slow thaw, like slow sunrise. You ask about the science behind it, and Sasha translates the question to her mother. Elena launches into an explanation in Yakut, gesturing with her hands, and Sasha does her best to interpret. She says the vegetables have water inside. Yes, when they freeze very fast, the ice is small, tiny crystals. But when you thaw them wrong, the ice melts weird and the vegetable structure breaks. So you do it gentle, slow, and the cells wake up almost like they were before. This is old knowledge. Soviet scientists came here in the 1950s to study it. They said, "Oh, you've been doing flash freezing for centuries." My grandmother said, "We've been doing not starving for centuries." There's a quirky piece of local history that Sasha shares while you're watching the carrots gradually return to flexibility. During the Soviet era, Yakutsk became a testing ground for extreme cold weather equipment and procedures. Scientists wanted to understand how machinery, vehicles, and yes, even food, behaved at temperatures that most of the world would never experience. They discovered that the local population had already solved most of the problems through trial, error, and inherited wisdom. The permafrost food cellars, the fast freeze preservation, the thermal architecture, it was all folk engineering that worked beautifully. The house itself sits on those stilts you noticed earlier, and now Elena takes you outside, properly bundled this time, to show you why. You're wearing so many layers you can barely move, and you've been warned not to breathe too deeply because the cold will hurt your lungs. Elena is wearing her everyday outdoor gear, looking like a fashionable Michelin man in fur and down. Beneath the house, in the gap between the frozen ground and the floor, cold air circulates freely. This keeps permafrost frozen, Sasha explains, her breath creating instant fog clouds. If house sits on ground, the heat leaks down, melts permafrost, and house sinks. Every building in Yakutsk is on stilts, even big apartment blocks, all on piles driven 10, 15 meters into frozen earth. You notice something else under here: boxes, containers, what looks like improvised storage. Extra freezer, Elena says in broken English, grinning. She opens one container and inside are more vegetables, onions this time frozen solid. Nature's refrigerator. Works perfect, costs nothing, never breaks down. It's brilliantly simple. The space under the house is cold enough to keep things frozen, but accessible enough that you don't have to trek to a separate building in a blizzard. It's protected from the worst of the wind and snow, and it's right there, beneath your feet. The modern world spent billions developing freezer technology that these folks essentially get for free 8 months a year. Back inside, and the transition from -45 degrees Celsius to +25 degrees Celsius hits you like a wall again, your nose running immediately as the frozen mucus melts. Elena returns to her cooking. The cabbage has now been sufficiently delayered, and she's working with the inner leaves, which are tender enough to cut. She chops with a rhythm that's almost musical, thunk 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 against the wooden cutting board. These inner cabbage leaves barely froze as hard as the outer ones. She explains through Sasha, because cabbage is clever. It protects its heart. The heat from the stove isn't just for cooking and warmth. It's also carefully managed to create different temperature zones in the kitchen itself, closest to the stove scalding. Good for boiling water and active cooking. A foot away, very warm. Good for thawing delicate items. 2 feet away, warm. Good for rising bread dough or keeping finished dishes from cooling too fast. 3 feet away, comfortable room temperature. It's like Elena has an analog thermostat that runs on spatial awareness and decades of experience. You watch her assemble ingredients for the salade Olivier, that Russian salad you know from Cold War-era dinner parties with potatoes, carrots, peas, eggs, pickles, and mayo. But here, in Yakutia, even the peas were frozen from last summer's garden, and the pickles come from a jar that was stored in the cold room, where the brine gets slushy but never quite freezes solid because of the salt content. Every ingredient has a story of preservation, a journey from summer abundance through winter's deep freeze to this February dinner table. Elena pulls out eggs from the cold room. They're not frozen solid, but they're cold enough that you could probably store them for months without refrigeration. Another quirk of extreme cold: bacterial growth slows to basically nothing at these temperatures. Food safety takes on completely different parameters when the ambient environment is inhospitable to nearly all microorganisms. In spring, Sasha mentions, when thaw comes, we have to eat everything quickly. The vegetables we kept all winter, maybe 2-3 weeks once it gets warmer and they start to go bad. So spring is feast time. We eat and eat and eat before the food turns. But that's months away. Right now, in the depths of winter, the cold is your ally, your larder, your technology. The Ivanovs don't have a large electric freezer humming away and running up the electricity bill. Why would they? The entire world outside is colder than any freezer you can buy at an appliance store. They do have a small refrigerator, you notice, and you ask about it. Sasha laughs. For summer, she explains. In summer, we need to keep things cool. In winter, we need to keep things from freezing too hard. Is backwards? Yes. The house makes those settling noises again. Creaks and groans as the temperature differential between inside and outside stresses the materials. Wood contracts in the cold, expands in warmth, and when you've got a 70-degree difference happening across a few inches of wall, things move. The house talks constantly, narrating its own structural story. Elena is now working on the beats for the borscht, and this is where things get visually spectacular. She's got 3 massive beets that she thawed using the gentle warm water method, and when she starts grating them, the juice that comes out is so intensely red it looks like paint. Fresh beets in summer are wonderful, sure, but there's something about the flash-frozen winter beets. The cold seems to concentrate the flavors, intensify the colors. Or maybe that's just romantic nonsense and you're getting hypnotized by the warmth and the rhythmic grating sound. Traditional Yakut food is very meat-heavy. Sasha tells you, settling into teacher mode. Horse meat especially. We kept horses for milk, meat, transportation. In real old days, vegetables were not main food, more like supplement. But Russian influence, Soviet times, and also we learned to grow more in summer. Now, vegetable garden is very important. Every family has plot outside the city. In June and July, everyone works like crazy to grow everything possible before freeze comes again. The growing season in Yakutia is absurdly short, maybe 60 to 70 days in a good year. But the summer daylight is equally absurd, 20 hours or more per day. Plants grow in a frenzy, racing against the calendar, pumping out potatoes and carrots and cabbage as fast as chlorophyll and photosynthesis can manage. Then, in August, you harvest everything, and in October, you freeze it all in nature's deep freeze, and you live off that bounty until the cycle begins again. There's a philosophical elegance to it, actually. Modern industrial food systems try to transcend seasons. You can buy strawberries in December, tomatoes in January, asparagus whenever you want. But that comes at tremendous energy and environmental cost. Here in Yakutia, you're locked into the seasons with no escape clause. Summer means growing and preserving. Winter means thawing and cooking what you preserved. It's an enforced mindfulness about food cycles that most of the developed world has forgotten. Elena adds the beets to a pot where onions are already sweating in butter, and the smell that fills the kitchen is extraordinary. Sweet, earthy, rich. She's adding the thawed cabbage now and potatoes, and a bone with some meat on it that's been simmering for an hour already, creating a stock that will form the base of the soup. This is slow food in its truest form, not because it's trendy but because the ingredients themselves demand patience. The stove gets another log and Elena adjusts the damper, a metal flap that controls how much air feeds the fire. Too much air and you burn through wood wastefully. Too little and the fire smolders inefficiently. It's yet another variable in the constant equation of heat management that governs life here. She's not thinking about it consciously anymore, you realize. Her hand moves to the damper with the automaticity of a lifetime's practice. This is embodied knowledge, muscle memory refined over tens of thousands of meals cooked on this exact stove. You think about your own kitchen back home, the gas range you can ignite with the press of a button, the temperature dial that lets you set exact heat levels, the refrigerator that maintains a constant 4 degrees Celsius without any input from you. All of that convenience is wonderful, genuinely, but it's also divorced you from the fundamental realities of food and heat and preservation. You don't really understand cold because you've never had to negotiate with it. You don't really understand heat because you've never had to coax it from logs and pray it lasts through the night. Here, though, Elena understands. She's in constant conversation with the thermal realities of her environment, making 1,000 tiny adjustments throughout the day to maintain the equilibrium that keeps her family alive and fed. The borscht is starting to come together now, the broth turning that deep, bloody red that only beets can produce. Elena tastes it, considers, adds salt, tastes again. She's satisfied. The pot will simmer for another hour, all the flavors melding and marrying, while she works on the salat. The potatoes are fully thawed now, tender enough to dice, and she cuts them with quick, precise movements. The carrots join them. The peas thawed in a bowl of water get added. Hard-boiled eggs, chopped, pickles diced. Everything goes into a large bowl. And then the mayo, except it's not mayo from a squeeze bottle. Elena made it herself yesterday, and it's been sitting in the cold room, which means it's stiffer than the commercial stuff, richer, with that homemade taste that's hard to describe but impossible to mistake. She dollops it generously over the salad and begins mixing, her hands doing the work that a spoon would do less efficiently. "We eat with hands more than you might think," Sasha says, noticing your attention. "Not like animals, but hands know things. You can feel when dough is right, when salad is mixed enough, when meat is proper texture. Spoons and forks don't tell you these things." The salad goes into the cold room to chill, which takes about 5 minutes, given the temperature in there. The borscht continues its slow simmer, and Elena, finally, sits down with her own glass of tea. She looks tired in the way that cooks do after they've been on their feet for hours, but satisfied. There's pride in feeding people, especially when feeding people requires this much negotiation with frozen vegetables and thermodynamics. Outside, full darkness has fallen. It's 4:30 p.m. The temperature has dropped another few degrees. It'll bottom out around 3 a.m., probably hitting minus 50 degrees Celsius or worse. But inside, in this warm kitchen that smells like beet soup and black tea, you're insulated from all that. The stove radiates its dependable heat. The walls do their job. The entire architecture of survival holds firm against the cold that wants to kill you. And you realize that this kitchen, this stove, this careful management of frozen vegetables and heat, this is what defying the void looks like. This is humanity saying no to an environment that should be uninhabitable, and making dinner anyway. The next morning, you wake to the sound of Elena already moving around in the kitchen. It's 7 a.m., still pitch dark outside, and the first order of business in any Yakutian household is resurrecting the stove. The fire died overnight, as fires do, and the house has cooled to maybe 15 degrees Celsius. Not dangerously cold, but cold enough that you can see your breath in the bedroom. You burrow deeper under the blankets, layers of wool and down and fur that trap heat in a cocoon of survival, and listen to the domestic sounds of Elena rebuilding civilization one log at a time. By the time you emerge, the kitchen is warming nicely, and Elena has tea waiting. Today's lesson, Sasha announces cheerfully, is about the source of all those frozen vegetables. The traditional Yakut food cellar, called a lednik, and the brief, frenzied growing season that makes winter survival possible. You're going to visit the family's plot outside the city, see the cellars, and understand how you stockpile enough vegetables to last 8 months of frozen darkness. The drive out takes 40 minutes in Dimitri's taxi. Yes, you've hired him again because he's got a vehicle that actually starts at minus 48 degrees Celsius, which is more than can be said for most cars. The engine block has a heating element that he plugs in overnight, and even so, the car complains bitterly as it turns over. Diesel fuel gets sludgy at these temperatures. Oil thickens. Batteries lose capacity. Everything mechanical is fighting the cold's desire to turn it into a static sculpture. In real old days, Dimitri says as he navigates the icy roads, people used horses. Horses don't freeze if you keep them moving and fed. Much more reliable than car. Stalin built the Road of Bones with labor camp workers, and still today, half the year you can barely use it. Yakutia is not place for machines. It's place for animals and very stubborn people. The Road of Bones, officially the Kalima Highway, is one of those historical footnotes that's almost too grim to believe. A road built by Gulag prisoners in the 1930s through some of the coldest territory on Earth, with so many workers dying from cold, starvation, and exhaustion that their bodies were supposedly buried in the road itself. Historians still argue whether the bones in the road story is literal truth or dark metaphor. But either way, it's a reminder that Soviet development in Yakutia came at tremendous human cost. You pass through the outskirts of Yakutsk, where the stilted buildings give way to smaller dachas and garden plots, and eventually you're in what passes for countryside. Flat, frozen, endless taiga stretching to a horizon that's just beginning to show the first gray hint of dawn. The landscape is monochromatic: white snow, black tree trunks, gray sky. It's beautiful in an austere, indifferent way, like a minimalist painting that doesn't care if you appreciate it or not. The Ivanov's plot is a few acres of land that, in summer, transforms into a vegetable factory. Right now, it's buried under 2 meters of snow. The garden bed's invisible. The greenhouse collapsed under the weight of accumulated snowfall. But there, standing like a small fortress, is the lednik, the traditional earth cellar that's been keeping vegetables fresh through Yakutian winters for generations. Dmitri drops you off and promises to return in a few hours. "Don't freeze," he says with his usual grin. "Is bad for tourism industry." Elena and Sasha have bundled you into so many layers that you can barely bend your arms, and they've insisted you wear a traditional Yakut face covering, a fur-lined mask that leaves only your eyes exposed. You look ridiculous. You also might survive more than 20 minutes outside, so vanity takes a back seat to not dying. The cellar entrance is a mound in the snow, and Sasha and her older brother, Mikhail, who drove out separately, start shoveling to reveal the wooden door. It's hard work. The snow at these temperatures packs like concrete, but within 15 minutes they've cleared enough to access the entrance. Mikhail pulls the door open, and cold air rolls out. Which is weird, right? Cold air coming out of a cellar when you're standing in minus 48 degrees Celsius? But this cold is different. It's still air, undisturbed, and somehow it feels even more aggressive than the ambient cold outside. Permafrost cellar, Sasha explains, dug into ground that never thaws. 3 meters down, maybe 4. Temperature stays constant, around minus 10 degrees Celsius to minus 15 degrees Celsius all year. Perfect for storage. You follow them down a set of wooden stairs that creak ominously. The walls are earth, frozen solid, of course, reinforced with wooden beams. It's like descending into the Earth's freezer, a pocket of cold that's been trapped here since the last ice age and pressed into service for storing potatoes. The ceiling is low enough that you have to duck, and the air smells like earth and frost and something ancient. Battery-powered lanterns illuminate the space. A room may be 3 meters by 3 meters, with wooden shelving along the walls and wooden bins on the floor. And everything is filled with vegetables. Potatoes in massive bins, sorted by size. Carrots in boxes, layered with sand. Beets stacked like cannonballs. Onions in mesh bags hanging from ceiling hooks. Cabbages arranged on shelves, each one touching its neighbor. It's a treasure trove that represents the labor of 2 months of frenzied summer cultivation and harvest. "This is from last summer," Sasha says, gesturing around. "July and August, we worked every day. My whole family, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. You have to. The growing season is so short. Maybe 70 days between last frost and first frost. So when things are ready, you harvest now, not tomorrow. Tomorrow might freeze." Mikhail picks up a potato from one of the bins. It's frozen solid, naturally, and holds it up to the lantern light. "Good one," he pronounces. "No rot, no soft spots. That's the trick with permafrost storage. Keep everything frozen, but not too frozen, and keep air circulating so moisture doesn't build up. Too much moisture and you get ice forming on vegetables, which ruins them. Too dry and they dehydrate. It's balance. The temperature in here is markedly different from outside. It's still well below freezing, but it's stable. The permafrost acts as a thermal buffer, protecting the contents from the wild temperature swings that happen above ground. In summer, when the surface might hit 25 degrees Celsius, it's cool down here. In winter, when it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside, it's only minus 12 degrees Celsius in the cellar. The Earth itself becomes a climate control system, asking for nothing but proper construction and respect for its limitations. "We learned this from ancestors," Elena says through Sasha's translation. "Before Soviet times, before Russian times even, Yakut people always used permafrost for storage. Some cellars are very old, maybe 100, 200 years, just maintained and rebuilt as needed. The ground remembers. The cold remembers. There's something almost spiritual in how she talks about it, and you don't think it's just translation quirks. The relationship between Yakut people and their environment isn't adversarial. It's collaborative. The cold isn't the enemy. It's a tool, a partner, a fact of life that you work with rather than against. The permafrost gives them storage. They give it respect and proper management. You notice that different vegetables are stored in different ways. The potatoes are loose in bins, which allows air circulation. The carrots are layered with slightly damp sand, which prevents them from drying out completely. The cabbages are arranged so air can move between them. The onions hang in bags where airflow is maximized. Everything is positioned according to principles that Elena learned from her mother, who learned from her mother going back generations. In Soviet times, Sasha explains, scientists came and said, "Oh, you're doing this wrong, use our modern methods." They tried to introduce electric freezers, concrete storage bunkers with ventilation fans. Some people tried it. Know what happened? She grins. Electric freezers broke down. Too cold, equipment failed. Concrete bunkers cracked from frost heaving. Fans froze. Meanwhile, our lead Nikki, she gestures around the earthen cellar. They just worked, like they always worked. The scientists eventually admitted our way was better for our conditions. This is a quirky detail that doesn't make it into many history books. The clash between Soviet-era technological optimism and indigenous knowledge that had been refined over centuries. The Soviets believed that science and industry could overcome any obstacle, including Siberian cold. Sometimes they were right. Yakutsk grew into a real city with electricity and heating and infrastructure that mostly works. But sometimes the old ways proved superior, and vegetable storage in permafrost cellars was one of those times. Mikhail is filling a sack with potatoes for his own family. He lives in an apartment in Yakutsk and doesn't have a cellar, so he relies on his parents' storage. He selects carefully, checking each potato for firmness, rejecting any that show signs of damage. Bad potato in the sack can spoil good ones, he explains. Even frozen, if something is rotting, the rot spreads. Slow, but it spreads. So you check, always check. The cellar also contains preserved foods beyond just vegetables. Jars of pickled cucumbers, fermented cabbage, canned berries from the taiga, blueberries, cloudberries, lingonberries picked during brief summer bounty. There are also frozen fish, stacked like cordwood, caught through ice fishing and immediately frozen in the open air. And there's meat, frozen horse meat primarily, which is the traditional staple. A whole frozen horse haunch is a sight to behold, like something from a museum diorama about prehistoric hunters. Horse meat is best for Yakutia, Elena says firmly. Horses adapted here over 1,000 years. They dig through snow to find grass. They survive cold better than cows. And the meat, very lean, very healthy. We make surat, which is frozen horse meat sliced thin and eaten raw with salt. Traditional Yakut food. Russians think is crazy, but is delicious and very nutritious. You're starting to understand that frozen in Yakutian cuisine isn't a state food passes through on its way to being cooked. It's often the final form, the way the food is meant to be consumed. The flash freezing that happens at extreme temperatures preserves flavor and texture in ways that conventional freezing can't match. And Yakutians have built an entire culinary tradition around this fact. The cellars aren't just about storage. They're about time-shifting summer's abundance into winter's scarcity. That's what agriculture has always been about, really, finding ways to make food available when it's not naturally growing. But Yakutians have refined this to an extreme degree out of sheer necessity. There is no running to the store for fresh tomatoes in February. There are only the vegetables you preserved, the meat you froze, and the ingenuity you bring to transforming these materials into meals. Sasha shows you how they organize the cellar for efficient access. The vegetables they use most frequently, potatoes, onions, carrots, are stored near the entrance. The things they use less often, beets, turnips, specialty items, are deeper in. It's a logic of convenience overlaid on the basic logic of preservation. When you're descending into a frozen cellar in the middle of winter, you don't want to spend more time than necessary searching for ingredients. How much food total is down here, you ask? Sasha translates the question, and Elena and Mikhail confer briefly, doing mental math. For our family, my parents, me, my brother when he visits, maybe 300 kilos of potatoes, 150 kilos of carrots, 100 kilos of cabbage, 50 kilos of beets and onions, plus the preserved items, plus meat and fish. Enough for winter if we're careful. If we have guests or hard times, we cut back portions. If we have surplus, we share with neighbors who had bad harvest. 300 kilograms of potatoes. That's 660 pounds, stored in an earthen hole in permanently frozen ground, staying fresh from October through May with no electricity, no technology beyond wooden bins and careful arrangement. It's food security built on intimate knowledge of environment and the willingness to perform backbreaking labor during the brief window when such labor is possible. You climb back up the stairs, and the transition from the cellar's -12 degrees Celsius to the outside's -48 degrees Celsius is somehow shocking, even though it's technically getting colder. Your lungs protest, your eyes water, and the tears immediately freeze on your eyelashes. This is not an environment where humans should be, and yet here you are, having just toured a vegetable storage facility that's been operating on the same principles for generations. Mikhail is shoveling snow back over the cellar entrance. You have to protect it from wind and additional snow accumulation, and also from any animals desperate enough to try digging in. Not that there are many animals active in these temperatures. Even the wolves hole up in dens when it gets this cold, and the famous Yakutian horses grow winter coats so thick they look like shaggy mammoths. In spring, Sasha says, her voice muffled through her face covering. When thaw comes, we have to clean out cellar. Whatever vegetables are left, we eat quickly or feed to animals. Then the ground thaws, top meter or so, and we have to inspect, make repairs if frost has shifted beams. Then in summer, we rebuild ice blocks if needed. Ice blocks? She explains. Some cellars reinforce their cooling capacity by storing large blocks of ice cut from rivers in the winter. These blocks, buried in the permafrost, can last years and provide additional temperature stability. It's like building a battery out of frozen water. Another example of using the environment's natural properties to enhance storage capacity. The sky has lightened to a pale gray. This is as bright as it gets in February at this latitude. The sun will make a brief, weak appearance on the horizon, barely clearing the tree line, and then it'll sink back down. You get maybe 4 hours of what could generously be called daylight. The rest is twilight or darkness, and you live accordingly. Elena is examining the collapsed greenhouse, shaking her head. Spring project, she says in English, one of her few practiced phrases. The greenhouse is a relatively modern addition, just 20 years old, Sasha explains, and it extends the growing season by a few precious weeks on each end. In June, you can start seedlings in there before the ground fully thaws. In August, you can keep tomatoes and peppers growing a bit longer before the first hard freeze ends everything. It's a marginal gain, but marginal gains matter when you're farming at 63 degrees north latitude. You ask about what they grow in summer, and Sasha's face lights up. Everything. Well, everything that can handle short season. Potatoes, 5 or 6 varieties, different storage characteristics. Carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, cabbage, regular cabbage, Chinese cabbage, onions, garlic, peas, beans, fast-growing varieties, cucumbers in the greenhouse, tomatoes in the greenhouse, though they don't always ripen, dill, parsley, other herbs, and flowers. My mother loves flowers. After 8 months of white and gray, you want color. It's a reminder that survival isn't just about calories and nutrients. It's also about beauty, about having marigolds and dahlias blooming in July, about proving that life can flourish even in a place that spends most of the year trying to kill it. The flowers don't preserve well, obviously. You can't freeze and thaw a marigold, but that's what makes them precious. They're ephemeral, summertime-only joy. Dimitri's car appears on the access road, exhaust creating huge plumes of white fog in the cold air. Your time at the garden plot is ending, but you've learned something fundamental. Those frozen vegetables in Elena's cold room aren't just food. They're the physical manifestation of summer labor, of generational knowledge, of humanity's refusal to accept environmental limitations. Their time made solid, July sunshine transformed into February sustenance, stored in the permanent darkness of permafrost. As you drive back to Yakutsk, you watch the city emerge from the ice fog like a mirage. Those buildings on stilts, those smoking chimneys, those triple-paned windows glowing with interior light. It's all part of the same defiant architecture. We will live here, Yakutians say through their cellars and their stoves and their careful preservation techniques. We will not just survive, we will feast. And tonight, Elena has promised, you'll help prepare indijurka, a traditional Yakut dish of frozen fish, and you'll finally understand what it means to cook with ingredients that are meant to stay frozen right up until they hit your plate. Back at the house, you spend the afternoon in a kind of domestic suspension. Too cold to go outside without serious purpose, too alert from the morning's expedition to nap. Elena moves through her kitchen routines, and you watch, finally beginning to recognize the patterns. The way she checks the stove every 20 minutes, adding a log or adjusting the damper. The way she rotates items in the thawing zone based on what she'll need when. The way she listens to the house's creaking conversation, nodding occasionally like it's telling her something useful. Around 3 p.m., already full dark outside, she begins preparing for tonight's lesson. Cooking with ingredients that remain frozen not because you forgot to thaw them, but because frozen is the actual desired state. This is where Yakutian cuisine diverges sharply from pretty much every other food tradition on the planet. Elsewhere, freezing is preservation for later cooking. Here, freezing is sometimes the cooking technique itself. Elena retrieves a whole frozen fish from the underhouse storage, a broad whitefish called chur, caught through ice fishing on the Lena River. The fish is frozen so solid it could be used as a club. She brings it to the kitchen table with both hands, the way you'd carry a piece of lumber, and sets it down with a solid thunk. You ask when it was caught. December, Sasha translates. 2 months ago. Is perfect now, frozen long enough that texture is right. Here's where it gets weird. Elena doesn't put the fish anywhere near the stove to thaw. Instead, she places it on a special wooden cutting board and retrieves what looks like a carpenter's plane from a drawer. Except it's specifically designed for fish, a blade set at a precise angle for shaving off paper-thin slices of frozen flesh. This is the key tool for making stroganina, the traditional Yakut frozen fish dish that's been sustaining people here for literally thousands of years. You cannot make stroganina from thawed fish, Sasha explains. Must be frozen solid, fresh frozen, and you slice it thin while frozen. Is like carpentry, but delicious. Elena positions the fish and begins to plane it, and translucent curls of frozen fish fall away like wood shavings, except they're pink-white and smell clean and faintly of river water. Each curl is so thin it's almost transparent, frozen into delicate ribbons that pile up on a platter. The physics of this are actually fascinating. When you freeze a fish at -40 degrees Celsius or colder, the ice crystals that form in the tissue are extremely small, much smaller than in a conventional freezer. This means less cellular damage. When you slice the frozen fish paper thin, those microcrystals give the flesh a unique texture that's somewhere between sashimi and sorbet. It melts on your tongue, releasing flavor without the mushiness that would come from thawing and then serving raw fish. Elena works methodically, rotating the fish, adjusting her angle, creating pile after pile of frozen fish ribbons. Her hands are practiced, confident. She's probably made stroganina 10,000 times in her life. The motion is meditative. Slide the plane forward, lift, watch the curl of fish fall, repeat. Slice after slice accumulates, and the whole frozen fish gradually becomes a sculpture of itself, reduced one translucent layer at a time. In old days, this was winter feast food, Sasha tells you. Hunters would catch fish through ice, freeze immediately in open air, and eat like this on the trail. Very high protein, very fresh, doesn't require cooking fire. You can feed whole family with one good fish. In Soviet times, Russians thought we were crazy eating raw frozen fish, but now even fancy restaurants in Moscow serve stroganina. They say, "Oh, how exotic, how traditional." We say, "This is Thursday dinner." There's a particular irony to traditional indigenous foods becoming trendy in urban centers, and Sasha is clearly amused by it. What was once survival food, the thing you ate because there was no fuel to cook or no time to prepare elaborate meals, is now served in restaurants with white tablecloths and wine pairings. But here, in Elena's kitchen, it's still what it always was. An ingenious use of extreme cold to create something delicious. The fish slices go onto a serving platter, and Elena arranges them in a circular pattern, like rose petals made of ice. She prepares a simple dipping mixture. Coarse salt and black pepper, mixed together. That's it. No elaborate sauces, no garnishes beyond maybe some frozen berries on the side. The fish itself is the star, its flavor preserved in frozen perfection. But Stroganina is just the beginning of tonight's frozen feast. Elena also brings out frozen horse liver, yes, you read that right, which will be prepared the same way. The liver is harder than the fish, denser, and requires more strength to plane into thin slices. Mikhail helps with this, using a heavier tool that looks almost like a cheese slicer but built for serious work. Liver is very nutritious, Sasha explains. High in iron, vitamins. In winter, when there's no fresh vegetables, no sunlight, you need these nutrients. Liver was survival food. Still is really, but now we appreciate the taste too. The frozen liver slices are darker, almost purple-red, and they curl like autumn leaves as Mikhail works. The texture is completely different from cooked liver, firmer, cleaner tasting, without that sometimes muddy flavor that turns people off liver dishes. Historians still argue whether the Yakut people invented Stroganina or inherited the technique from earlier indigenous groups in Siberia, but the practice is certainly ancient. Archaeological evidence suggests that northern peoples have been eating frozen raw fish for at least 8,000 years, possibly longer. It's one of those techniques that seems weird until you realize it's perfectly adapted to the environment. When you can freeze a fish in minutes just by leaving it outside, and when that fish will stay frozen for months, why would you bother with salt curing or smoking when fresh frozen works beautifully? Now Elena brings out the ingredients for indijurka, another traditional frozen fish dish, but this one's more of a salad. She's got frozen whitefish, frozen onions, and she'll add salt, pepper, and vegetable oil. The preparation method is almost shocking in its simplicity. You take the frozen fish, you chop it into chunks, not the delicate slices of Stroganina, and you mix it with the other ingredients while everything is still frozen solid. She starts by chopping the frozen fish with a cleaver that makes sharp crack sounds against the cutting board. Each impact could probably be heard throughout the house. The fish doesn't so much get cut as shatter into angular pieces, crystalline and sharp-edged. The frozen onions get the same treatment, crack, 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 breaking into irregular chunks. The trick with indijurka, Sasha says, is that you prepare it frozen, but you eat it as it starts to thaw. So, the fish is frozen when you put it in bowl, but by the time it gets to table and you serve it, it's starting to soften. The texture changes as you eat. First bite is very firm, almost crunchy, but by last bite it's more tender. It's like watching time pass in your mouth. Elena tosses the frozen fish chunks and onion chunks together in a large bowl, adds salt, pepper, and a generous glug of sunflower oil. The oil is the only room temperature ingredient, and it immediately starts to freeze into semi-solid globs when it hits the frozen fish. She mixes everything with her hands. The cold doesn't seem to bother her at all, and the result looks like something between a salad and gravel. It's not conventionally pretty, but there's something honest about it, something that refuses to pretend food is anything other than what it is. You might think it's strange, all this frozen food, Sasha says, watching your face. But think about sushi, raw fish, yes? Or steak tartare, raw meat. Or ceviche, raw fish in acid. Every culture has raw foods. Ours are just raw and frozen. The cold is like cooking in a way. It changes the texture, preserves flavor, kills parasites. In some ways is safer than raw fish in warm climates, because parasites cannot survive at -40 degrees Celsius. She's not wrong. There's actually solid food safety science backing frozen raw fish. The extreme cold kills parasites and bacteria that would be concerns with raw fish in other contexts. The US FDA actually requires that fish being served raw be frozen first, though at much warmer temperatures, -35 degrees Celsius, and for longer periods than what happens naturally in Yakutia. Here, the environment itself provides food safety through sheer thermal brutality. The spread is taking shape now. The Stroganina fish and liver, arranged artfully on platters. The indijurka in its bowl, already starting to show the first signs of thaw around the edges. And some thawed vegetables that Elena prepared earlier, pickled cucumbers and tomatoes from summer, which provide a nice acidic contrast to the rich frozen proteins. There's also kerchek, a traditional Yakut whipped cream dessert made from frozen cream that's been beaten with berries until it's fluffy. It's basically Arctic ice cream, invented long before anyone had ice cream makers. Elena sets out the salt and pepper mixture for the stroganina, along with small plates and forks. The whole family gathers. Mikhail and his wife Olga, Sasha, Elena, and Elena's husband Victor, who's been out doing something with the car all day and comes in looking like a frosted bear. Everyone settles around the table, and there's a moment of appreciation. Not formal grace, exactly, but a collective acknowledgement that food is about to happen. Victor picks up a curl of stroganina, dips it in the salt mixture, and pops it in his mouth. He chews thoughtfully, nods, says something in Yakut. He says the fish is good quality, Sasha translates. From the deep part of the river where water is cleanest. You can taste the difference. You try a piece yourself. The texture is bizarre. It starts frozen and firm against your tongue, but immediately begins to melt, releasing delicate fish flavor that's clean and sweet, with none of the fishiness that sometimes plagues seafood. The salt and pepper provide just enough seasoning to enhance without overwhelming. It's genuinely delicious, and completely unlike any fish preparation you've had before. The liver is more challenging, richer, more intense, with that mineral tang that liver always has. But frozen, it's less overwhelming than cooked liver can be. The cold seems to mute some of the intensity while preserving the nutritional density. You can see why this would be valuable winter food. Compact, nutrient-rich, requiring zero cooking fuel. Everyone's eating and chatting, well, they're chatting in Yakut and Russian, and Sasha is translating highlights for you. There's talk about a neighbor's broken car, about whether the cold snap will break soon, probably not. About summer garden plans, too early, but people like to dream. It's deeply domestic, deeply ordinary, except you're eating frozen raw fish and liver in a house that's fighting off minus 50 degrees Celsius darkness outside. The indijerka is interesting because you can literally feel the temperature changing as you eat. The first bites are firm, almost crunchy, the frozen fish and onion barely yielding to your teeth. But as the dish sits on the table, exposed to the room's warmth, it softens progressively. 5 minutes later, the texture is completely different. Yielding, tender, almost buttery. It's like eating a time-lapse of thawing, each bite capturing a different moment in the transition from frozen to fresh. This is why we don't cook everything, Sasha explains between bites. Cooking is good, yes, but frozen fresh has different qualities. Different textures, different flavors. If you cook frozen fish, you lose something. If you thaw and then cook, you lose something else. But if you eat while frozen or eat while thawing, you get flavors that cooking can't give you. It's a sophisticated culinary philosophy dressed up as simplicity. The Yakut kitchen isn't primitive or limited. It's adapted. It takes the environmental reality of extreme cold and says, okay, what can we do with this that nobody else can do? And the answer is, create dishes that exist in a temperature range that most of the world's cuisines never even consider. There's also something refreshing about the honesty of it. Modern cooking often involves elaborate disguises, making vegetables look like meat, creating foams and gels and deconstructions that hide the essential nature of ingredients. But stroganina is unapologetically itself. This is frozen fish. We sliced it thin. We added salt. Done. The ingredient is the dish, and the technique serves only to make that ingredient accessible and delicious. The conversation has turned to ice fishing. Victor is planning an expedition next week, and he's trying to recruit Mikhail, who is protesting that he doesn't want to sit in minus 50 degrees Celsius waiting for fish. You sit in warm office all week, Victor argues through Sasha's translation. Is not healthy. You need cold air. Need to remember you are Yakut, not Moscow office worker. Mikhail grumbles, but you can tell he'll go. There's pride in maintaining traditional skills, even when your day job involves spreadsheets and emails. Elena brings out the kerchek, that whipped frozen cream dessert, and it's absurdly good. Light, airy, sweet tart from the cloudberries mixed in, and cold enough to make your teeth ache. It's like eating a cloud made of winter, if clouds tasted like berries and happiness. The cream had been frozen solid, but the act of beating it while frozen incorporated air and changed the structure. creating something that's technically ice cream but texturally unique. My grandmother made this for celebrations, Elena says through Sasha. Weddings, festivals, when important guests came. Was special because requires cream, which was precious. Not many cows in Yakutia, mostly horses, and they give milk differently. So, Kerchek was luxury. Now we can get cream easier, but still feels special when we make it. As the meal winds down, everyone leans back, satisfied. The plates are empty except for a few curls of fish and some drops of oil. Outside, the wind has picked up. You can hear it testing the walls, probing for weaknesses, finding none. The stove radiates its steady warmth. The house holds firm. And you've just eaten a meal that's been served in fundamentally the same form for thousands of years. A direct culinary link to ancestors who figured out how to not just survive but thrive in the coldest inhabited corner of the planet. You understand now? Sasha asks. Why we don't fight the cold? Why we use it? You nod. You're beginning to. The frozen vegetables, the stroganina, the permafrost cellars, they're all part of a comprehensive strategy that turns environmental extremity into advantage. Where others see hostile wasteland, Yakutians see the world's most reliable freezer, the freshest possible seafood, and the freedom to preserve summer's abundance with technology that never breaks down and never needs electricity. It's almost philosophical. Acceptance without surrender, adaptation without loss of identity. The cold will always be here, so make the cold work for you. The morning after your frozen feast, you wake to find Elena already engaged in what Sasha calls the thaw dance. The careful, deliberate process of bringing frozen vegetables back to a state where they can be cooked without turning into mush or taking 17 hours to soften. This is where the real skill reveals itself, where centuries of accumulated knowledge separate success from soggy failure. You stumble into the kitchen, still groggy, and find Elena with 6 different containers arranged in a precise semicircle around the stove's warm zone. Each container holds vegetables at different stages of thawing. Potatoes that went into cool water an hour ago, carrots that are being misted with room temperature water every 15 minutes, beets wrapped in a damp cloth, onions sitting in what looks like a strategic spot exactly 2 feet from the stove's radiant heat. It's like watching a conductor manage an orchestra, except the instruments are frozen root vegetables and the music is dinner. Temperature gradient is everything, Sasha explains, nursing her morning tea. Too fast, cells rupture, vegetables turn to mush. Too slow, you waste whole day waiting. My mother can look at frozen potato and know exactly how long it needs, what temperature water, where to place it. Is art and science together. Elena picks up one of the potatoes from the cool water bath and squeezes it gently. Still too firm. She returns it to the water and adjusts the container's position slightly. Maybe 3 inches closer to the stove. That minuscule adjustment will change the water temperature by perhaps half a degree, which will alter the thawing rate by minutes. It's micromanagement at a level that would make a control-freak chef weep with envy. You ask about the science behind it, and Sasha launches into an explanation that she clearly learned from multiple sources: Soviet-era school lessons, her mother's kitchen wisdom, and maybe some internet research. When water freezes, it forms crystals, yes? If freezing happens very fast, like in our climate, crystals are tiny, microscopic. They fit between cell walls in the vegetable without breaking everything. But when you thaw, if you do it wrong, those crystals melt unevenly and the water escapes, rupturing cells. Then you have sad, mushy vegetables that taste like disappointment. The key is gradual warming that allows water to redistribute evenly back into the cellular structure. Think of it like rehydrating dried mushrooms, except you're doing it with something that was never actually dry. It was just frozen so thoroughly that all its water became temporarily solid. The goal is to reverse the freeze without traumatizing the vegetable's infrastructure. Elena demonstrates with a carrot. She's got one that's been thawing for about 40 minutes, and when she cuts into it, the flesh is firm but not rock hard. See, Sasha translates. Outside is soft enough to cut. Inside is still partly frozen. This is good for some dishes. You can slice it now, and by time it cooks, the inside will finish thawing. The heat from cooking completes the thaw, so everything happens smooth. But for other dishes, like the salade olivier she's planning for tonight's dinner, you want completely thawed vegetables with their full texture restored. For those, the process is slower, gentler, more patient. The potatoes have been in their cool water bath for 90 minutes now, and when Elena tests one, she nods with satisfaction. "Ready," she announces. She pulls out the potatoes, pats them dry, and begins peeling. The peels come off cleanly, revealing flesh that looks exactly like a fresh potato, firm, slightly moist, creamy white. You wouldn't know it had spent 4 months frozen solid at -15 degrees Celsius if you hadn't witnessed the entire journey. She cuts one open to show you. The interior texture is perfect, no mushiness, no graininess, just potato being potato. The mistake people make, Sasha says, is using hot water. They think, "Oh, I want to thaw this fast, I'll use hot water." But hot water on frozen vegetable is like, she searches for the metaphor, like jumping into hot bath when you have hypothermia. Shock, the outside cooks while inside is still frozen, and everything goes wrong. Warm water, cool water, these are your friends. Hot water is enemy. Historians have documented that indigenous peoples across the Arctic, from Yakutia to Alaska to Greenland, independently developed similar slow thaw techniques, suggesting that this knowledge emerges naturally from practical experience with frozen foods. The Inuit had methods for thawing frozen seal meat, the Sami had techniques for frozen reindeer, and the Yakuts perfected vegetable thawing. It's convergent evolution in culinary practice. Elena is now working on the cabbage for tonight's soup, and this requires a different approach entirely. Cabbage, when frozen, becomes almost wooden in its hardness. The layers compress and bond together in ways that make simple thawing insufficient. She's got a whole cabbage that she's been working on since before you woke up, and the process is elaborate. First, it sat in cool water for an hour. Then she began peeling away the outer leaves as they softened, exposing the inner leaves to the water. Now she's got it down to the heart, and she's using a technique that looks almost surgical, carefully cutting between layers that are soft enough to separate while leaving the still frozen core intact. With cabbage, you work from outside in, Sasha explains. Like peeling artichoke. You don't wait for whole thing to thaw because by time center is ready, outside is too soft. So you harvest leaves as they thaw and use them at different stages. Outer leaves, good for soup, they've been thawed longest. Inner leaves, good for salad or filling for pelmeni. The heart, maybe that goes back in cold room for next week. It's an approach to ingredients that treats them as dynamic, changing things rather than static products. A frozen cabbage isn't just a cabbage. It's a vegetable passing through multiple states, each state suitable for different culinary applications. The thawing process doesn't just restore the cabbage to its pre-frozen state. It creates opportunities for differentiation and choice. You notice Elena has also set out frozen mushrooms, foraged from the taiga last summer and flash frozen immediately. These she's thawing differently than the vegetables. They're in a colander over a bowl, sitting at room temperature away from the stove. Mushrooms have a lot of water, Sasha explains. When they thaw, water drains out. You want to catch that water, it has flavor, you can use it in soup or sauce. But you don't want mushrooms sitting in their own water, or they get slimy. The mushroom water dripping into the bowl below is dark and aromatic, concentrated forest essence. Elena will definitely use this in tonight's soup. Nothing gets wasted in a kitchen where every ingredient represents summer labor and careful preservation. That mushroom water is flavored gold, the liquid memory of July sunshine and taiga soil. There's a quirky detail about Yakutian mushroom foraging that Sasha shares. Because the summer is so short, the entire population descends on the taiga during mushroom season like a coordinated invasion. Families have secret spots passed down through generations, and there's friendly competition about who finds the best boletes or honey mushrooms. It's like treasure hunting but delicious, Sasha says. And everyone freezes their whole harvest in one night, leaving bags of mushrooms outside. In the morning, frozen solid, ready for storage. The thawing process Elena is demonstrating isn't just about technique. It's about respecting the ingredient's journey. These vegetables have been preserved in a state of suspended animation for months, and bringing them back requires care. Rush it, and you destroy the cellular structure that the fast freeze preserved. Do it right, and you get vegetables that taste remarkably fresh, with textures that rival or even surpass conventionally stored produce. There's a moment where Elena looks at her array of thawing vegetables. The potatoes ready, the carrots halfway there, the cabbage being peeled layer by layer, the mushrooms dripping their aromatic essence, and says something in Yakut that makes Sasha laugh. She says this is why she married my father. He never complains that dinner preparation starts at 6 a.m. for a 7 p.m. meal. He understands that feeding people from frozen vegetables is not quick process. Victor, mentioned as if summoned, appears from the bedroom looking like he slept well. He surveys the kitchen operation, nods approvingly, and says something brief. He says it smells like good cooking is happening. Sasha translates. This is high praise from him. He's man of few words. Elena is now addressing the beets, which are perhaps the most temperamental of frozen vegetables. Beets have high sugar content, which affects how they freeze and thaw. She's using the warm water method, but with constant monitoring. Every 10 minutes she pulls one out, tests it with her thumb, and either returns it to the water or declares it ready. The ones that are ready go into a steaming pot where they'll finish cooking. Beets are special, Sasha says. The sugar makes them freeze a little differently, not quite as hard as potato, but harder than cabbage. And when you cook them from partially thawed state, the sugar caramelizes in an interesting way. Soviet scientists actually studied Yakutian frozen beets because the flavor profile was unique. Turns out fast freeze at extreme temperature preserves sugars better than slow freeze, and then the thaw and cook process creates different Maillard reactions than cooking fresh beets. You're struck by how much science underlies what Elena does intuitively. She probably doesn't think about Maillard reactions or cellular ice crystal formation. She just knows that this water temperature for this duration with these beets produces that result. It's embodied knowledge, the kind that can't be fully captured in recipes or textbooks because it includes variables like the way the potato feels when it's ready and the sound the carrot makes when you cut it at the right thawness. The kitchen is warming up nicely now, the stove has been fed multiple times, and between the cooking, the thawing, and the human bodies moving around, the temperature is probably hitting 28 degrees Celsius. Outside, it's minus 52 degrees Celsius. That 80-degree differential is being managed by thick walls, smart architecture, and constant human attention to heat sources. You're living in a bubble of warmth that requires active maintenance every waking hour. Elena starts dicing the fully thawed potatoes for tonight's salad, and her knife work is impressive. Uniform cubes, fast cuts, no wasted motion. These potatoes will be boiled briefly, then cooled, then mixed with other ingredients. The fact that they started frozen 4 hours ago is already becoming invisible. They're just potatoes now, ready to become part of a dish that's been feeding Russians and Yakuts for over a century. Salade Olivier is interesting food history, Sasha says, apparently in teaching mode. Invented by Belgian chef in Moscow in 1860s, became popular across Russian Empire. Originally had grouse, crayfish, fancy ingredients. But after revolution, people adapted, used what they had. In Yakutia, we use what survives freezing well. Potatoes, carrots, peas, eggs. Is people's food now, not rich people's food. Every family has own variation. The carrots are ready now, and Elena adds them to the boiling pot with the potatoes. The peas, frozen garden peas from last summer, don't need thawing at all. They'll go directly into the salad, tiny green spheres that spent 8 months in suspended animation and will burst back to life when mixed with the other ingredients and the creamy dressing. You're watching mastery in action, you realize. Elena moves through her kitchen with the confidence of someone who's solved this puzzle 10,000 times. Every decision, which vegetable to start thawing when, which method to use when to transition from thawing to cooking, is informed by experience that stretches back through her mother's kitchen. Her grandmother's kitchen, great-grandmother's kitchen, each generation refining the techniques and passing them forward. In Soviet times, Sasha mentions, they tried to modernize everything. Wanted everyone to use electric stoves, electric freezers, scientific methods. My grandmother, she ignored most of it. She said, I thaw potatoes my mother's way because my mother's way works. And she was right. The scientists eventually agreed that for Yakutian conditions, traditional methods were often superior. Not always, but often. There's a recurring theme here. The clash between modern technological solutions and ancient adaptive wisdom. with the wisdom often winning because it's been refined through countless iterations in exactly these conditions. The scientists were optimizing for abstract principles. The Yakut cooks were optimizing for feeding families in -50 degrees Celsius winters using vegetables stored in permafrost cellars. Different goals, different solutions. Elena pulls the potatoes and carrots from the boiling water. They're not fully cooked, just blanched enough to finish the thawing process and soften them to the right texture. She drains them and spreads them on a platter to cool, steam rising in soft clouds. Within 10 minutes, they'll be cool enough to mix with the other ingredients. Within 30 minutes, they'll be perfect salad temperature. Meanwhile, she's starting the soup, a rich sky with cabbage, mushrooms, and potatoes. The cabbage leaves she peeled earlier go in first, along with the mushroom water and some broth made from yesterday's chicken bones. The smell is incredible: earthy mushrooms, sweet cabbage, the subtle allium note from onions that are also thawing nearby for later addition. This is what warmth smells like when you're surrounded by cold. This is what survival tastes like when done with skill and love. The thawing dance continues, each ingredient moving through its own timeline from frozen solid to ready for use. And you understand now that this isn't just cooking. It's a form of time travel, bringing summer's abundance forward through winter's darkness, preserving not just calories but flavor, texture, and the memory of warmer days. The thaw is the bridge between storage and consumption, and crossing that bridge properly is what separates sad winter meals from celebrations of seasonal resilience. By late afternoon, the kitchen has become a laboratory of controlled temperature transitions. Elena has shifted from the careful thawing phase into what Sasha calls the transformation, the point where frozen or partially frozen ingredients become actual dishes, where preservation meets consumption, where chemistry and tradition collide in the most delicious ways possible. Tonight's centerpiece will be stroganina again, but this time with a twist. You're going to help prepare it, which means you're about to learn that shaving frozen fish into delicate ribbons is significantly harder than it looks when Elena does it. She brings out a different fish this time, omul, a cousin of salmon found in Lake Baikal and the northern rivers. It's been frozen since November, stored in the underhouse freezer, and it's hard as marble. First rule, Sasha translates as Elena positions the fish on the cutting board. The fish must be completely frozen, not mostly frozen, completely frozen. If there's any softness, the plane will tear instead of shave, and you get ugly pieces instead of beautiful curls. She demonstrates by pressing her thumb against the fish's side. It doesn't yield at all. Perfect. Elena hands you the planing tool and gestures for you to try. You position the blade against the fish's flank and push. Nothing happens. The blade skates off the frozen surface like you're trying to cut granite. Angle, Sasha says. More angle, more pressure. Smooth motion, like petting a cat, but with determination. You adjust, try again. This time the blade catches, and crack, a chunk of fish breaks off instead of curling. Elena winces. Sasha tries not to laugh. Okay, so maybe less determination, she says. Find the middle way. Zen and the art of fish shaving. It takes you about 15 attempts to produce something resembling a proper curl of stroganina. When you finally do, there's a small celebration. Elena nods approvingly, Sasha claps, and you feel absurdly proud of having successfully turned frozen fish into a transparent ribbon. It's harder than carpentry because the wood is slightly organic, with grain that varies and a tendency to crack if you hit it wrong. Each fish has a personality, Elena explains through gestures and Sasha's translation. You have to listen to what the fish is telling you. My mother learned this from her grandmother, Sasha says. Who learned from her grandmother. This technique is old, maybe thousands of years old. Before metal tools, they used sharpened bone. Before that, maybe sharpened stone. The principle is same. Frozen protein sliced thin enough to eat immediately, preserving all nutrition and flavor. You work on the omul for 30 minutes, eventually finding a rhythm. The curls start coming more consistently, piling up on the platter in pale pink ribbons that catch the light like stained glass. Your hands are cold despite the warm kitchen. Holding frozen fish will do that, but there's satisfaction in the work. You're participating in something ancient, a culinary practice that predates written history. Elena takes over when your hands get too cold. and she produces stroganina at roughly 5 times your speed, each curl perfect, each motion economical. She's shaved thousands of fish in her life, and it shows. The platter fills quickly under her expert hands, and soon there's enough for dinner and then some. But stroganina is just one element of tonight's feast. Elena has also been working on Kerchek, that whipped frozen cream dessert, and this is where the Yakutian approach to frozen foods gets genuinely weird in the best way. She's got a bowl of heavy cream that's been frozen solid, sitting in a larger bowl packed with snow from outside to keep it cold. And now she's going to beat it, while frozen, until it transforms into something fluffy. Physics experiment, Sasha grins, clearly enjoying your confused expression. Frozen cream has different structure than liquid cream. When you beat it while frozen, air incorporates differently. Ice crystals break down but don't melt. They become tiny, suspended in the fat and air mixture. Result is texture you cannot get any other way. Elena uses a traditional wooden whisk, no electric mixers here, and begins beating the frozen cream with steady, powerful strokes. First, nothing seems to happen. The cream is a solid mass resisting transformation. But she persists, and gradually, very gradually, the texture begins to change. The solid mass becomes crumbly. The crumbles become finer. The fine crumbles start incorporating air and becoming fluffy. It's like watching ice slowly become snow. Then snow becomes something lighter than snow. A foam made of frozen fat and air that shouldn't exist but does. After about 20 minutes of steady beating, the transformation is complete. The bowl contains what looks like thick, white clouds. Elena adds frozen cloudberries, little orange jewels that look like a cross between raspberries and salmon roe, and gently folds them in. This dessert is pure Yakut invention, Sasha says proudly. Russians didn't have it, Soviets didn't know about it until they came here. It uses the extreme cold as essential ingredient. You cannot make real Kerchek without temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. It's like our version of ice cream, except ice cream is trying to stay frozen, and Kerchek is frozen by nature, transformed by effort. The final dish requiring frozen ingredients is salamat, that traditional porridge-like dish Sasha mentioned your first night here. But today's version incorporates frozen butter that Elena has been carefully rationing from last summer's butter-making session. The butter was churned from summer milk when the cows were eating fresh grass, then frozen in blocks. It has a color that's almost golden, a richness that winter butter can't match. Elena melts this precious butter in a heavy pan, then adds flour, grinding flour in a hand mill, because why not make everything from scratch when you've already embraced the long way of doing things? The flour toasts in the butter, filling the kitchen with a nutty aroma that makes your stomach growl. She stirs constantly, preventing burning, building the roux that will form the base of the salamat. This dish is old comfort food, Sasha explains. High calories, high fat, which you need in winter. Warms you from inside. My mother makes it special by using summer butter. Taste is different, more alive, like sunshine in butter form. Gradually, Elena adds sour cream, also preserved from summer, kept in the cold room where it stays fresh for months, and continues stirring. The mixture thickens, becomes glossy, transforms from a roux into something that looks almost like caramel. Salt gets added, just a pinch, balancing the richness. The stirring continues for another 10 minutes until the salamat reaches the right consistency. Thick enough to coat the spoon, fluid enough to pour. She divides it among small bowls and sets them aside to cool slightly. Salamat is served warm but not hot, and it's eaten with a spoon, slowly savored. It's the kind of food that sticks to your ribs. Hell, it probably builds your ribs, providing the caloric density that -50 degrees Celsius winters demand. The table is being set now, and you're struck by the contrast between the elaborate preparation and the simple presentation. No fancy plating, no garnishes for Instagram, just good food arranged on practical dishware. The stroganina gets its platter, the Kerchek its bowl, the salamat its individual portions. There's also pickled vegetables from the cold room, cucumbers and tomatoes that provide acidic brightness against the rich main dishes. Victor and Mikhail arrive. They've been doing something with Mikhail's car, trying to winterize it better, and they stamp snow off their boots in the entrance hall, shaking ice crystals from their fur hats. -53 degrees Celsius, Victor announces, like he's reporting a sports score. Everyone groans. It's been getting progressively colder all week, and there's talk of this cold snap possibly breaking the local record. Good Stroganina weather, Mikhail jokes. Fish stays frozen until it hits your mouth. Everyone laughs, but it's actually true. At these temperatures, you could serve Stroganina outside and it would remain perfectly frozen through the entire meal. Not that you'd want to eat outside, because your jaw muscles would seize up and your lips would freeze to your fork. The family gathers around the table, and there's that moment again, the collective pause before eating, an acknowledgement that might be gratitude or simply recognition that food is here, winter hasn't won, and warmth prevails for another night. Victor says something that sounds formal, and everyone murmurs agreement. Old Yakut blessing, Sasha translates. Thanks to the earth for holding our food cold, thanks to the summer for growing it, thanks to winter for preserving it, thanks to the cook for preparing it, and thanks to fire for keeping us alive. Is pre-industrial theology condensed into one sentence. Earth, seasons, food, fire. The elements that matter when you live at the edge of habitability. Everyone takes Stroganina first. The delicate frozen fish curls that melt on the tongue, releasing clean, sweet flavors that taste nothing like fishy and everything like pure. The texture is extraordinary. Firm for just a moment, then dissolving into silky richness. You grab another piece, then another, and suddenly you understand why this has been a delicacy here for millennia. It's not weird frozen fish. It's a completely unique form of protein preparation that works because it's frozen. The liver Stroganina follows, richer, more intense, almost buttery in its fat content. Mikhail seems particularly fond of this, taking generous portions and nodding with satisfaction. Good for blood, he says in halting English, one of his few practiced phrases. Liver makes strong blood for winter. He's not wrong. Liver is absurdly nutrient-dense, high in iron, vitamin A, B vitamins, and in a winter where fresh vegetables are limited and sunlight is nearly absent, these nutrients are crucial. The Yakut diet evolved to prioritize exactly these kinds of foods, and the frozen preparation method preserves the nutrients that cooking might destroy. The salamat is served next, and you take your first spoonful expecting something thick and heavy. It is heavy, calorically speaking. This is probably equivalent to eating a stick of butter mixed with flour, but it's also delicate, smooth, with that toasted flour nuttiness and the tang of sour cream creating complexity. It's comfort food that tastes like safety, like survival, like making it through another day in the cold. My grandmother used to say, Sasha mentions between bites, that salamat is what keeps Yakut people warm from inside. She said you can wear all the fur in the world, but if your belly isn't warm, you're still cold. This makes belly warm. There's folk wisdom in that observation, backed by modern nutritional science. High-fat foods provide sustained energy and help maintain core body temperature. When you're burning 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day just to stay warm, you need dense caloric sources. Salamat delivers. The kerchek appears for dessert, and it's like eating a frozen cloud flavored with summer berries. The texture is impossible. Somehow creamy and icy at the same time, light but substantial, sweet but not cloying. The cloudberries provide tart bursts that cut through the richness, and the whole thing melts on your tongue, leaving just a whisper of cold and a memory of berry flavor. This is what summer tastes like, Sasha says quietly, almost reverently. In February, when summer feels like it never happened and never will happen again, you eat kerchek and remember. Summer is real. It will come back. The berries prove it. It's an unexpectedly poetic moment, and you realize that frozen foods in Yakutia aren't just about preservation. They're about hope. They're tangible proof that the world wasn't always this cold, won't always be this cold, that warmth and growth and abundance are part of the cycle even when they feel impossibly distant. The meal winds down slowly, everyone lingering at the table because the alternative is ending the evening and facing the reality of another frozen night. The stove is fed again. Tea is served again. Victor tells a story about ice fishing that involves a fox, a dropped fish, and what sounds like slapstick comedy but is apparently completely true. Everyone laughs, and for a while the cold outside might as well not exist. But it does exist, of course. It's always there, pressing against the walls, testing the windows, waiting for any failure in the thermal defenses. You can hear the house creaking as materials contract in the extreme cold. Hear the wind picking up outside. Hear the sharp crack of a tree branch snapping somewhere in the distance because its sap has frozen solid. This is the reality of cooking with frozen vegetables in Yakutia. The food is delicious. The techniques are sophisticated. The results are impressive. But underlying everything is the constant awareness that you're eating this way not primarily by choice but by necessity. The cold dictates everything: what you can grow, how you store it, how you prepare it, how you serve it. And yet, within those constraints, the Yakut people have created something beautiful. They've taken environmental brutality and transformed it into culinary advantage. Turned the world's most reliable natural freezer into a source of unique dishes that can't be replicated anywhere else. The frozen fish that melts on your tongue, the whipped frozen cream, the vegetables that taste remarkably fresh months after harvest. These aren't compromises. They're achievements. Elena starts clearing plates, and you move to help, but she waves you off. Guests don't clean in a Yakut household, apparently. Sasha translates. She says you worked hard making stroganina. Your job is done. Now rest, drink tea, be warm. So you sit, cradling a glass of hot tea in both hands, watching Elena and Sasha move through their cleaning routine, while Victor and Mikhail argue good-naturedly about whether this cold snap will last another week or break soon. Outside, the temperature continues to drop. Inside, the stove continues to burn. And somewhere in the cold room, tomorrow's vegetables wait in their frozen state, holding summer's gifts in suspended animation until it's time to begin the thawing dance all over again. The next morning brings a minor crisis. The electricity is out. Not unusual in Yakutsk during extreme cold. The combination of increased demand for heating and the stress that minus 55 degrees Celsius puts on infrastructure means periodic outages are just part of winter life. But it's an opportunity to see how traditional Yakut households handle emergencies that would cripple modern urban dwellers. Elena barely reacts to the news. She lights candles and oil lamps with practiced efficiency, and the kitchen takes on a softer, more primal quality in the flickering light. The stove, which requires no electricity whatsoever, continues burning as it has for the past 100 years, completely indifferent to whether the power grid is functioning. The cold room doesn't need electricity. The underhouse freezer is powered by nature. Suddenly you realize that the Ivanov household could lose grid power for a month and barely notice, at least in terms of food storage and preparation. Soviet planners were very proud of bringing electricity to Yakutia, Sasha says, lighting another lamp. And yes, electricity is nice, but our grandmothers always said, trust the old ways first, modern ways second. Because modern ways break. Cold breaks them. Old ways, fire, ice, earth, these don't break. It's a philosophy that seems increasingly relevant as climate change makes weather more unpredictable and infrastructure more vulnerable. The Yakut approach to food isn't just historically interesting. It's potentially prophetic, a model for resilience that doesn't depend on complex supply chains or reliable electricity. With the power out, you're going on a proper expedition today, visiting the central market in Yakutsk where vendors sell frozen goods directly from outdoor stalls. Because when it's minus 55 degrees Celsius outside, the entire city becomes one giant walk-in freezer, and commerce adapts accordingly. Dmitry arrives in his miraculously still-functioning car. He's smug about this, as if the car's willingness to start is a personal victory, and you bundle up for the journey. The market is a revelation. Rows of outdoor stalls, no refrigeration needed, with vendors bundled in so much fur and down that they look like friendly bears. And the products. Frozen fish stacked like cordwood, frozen meat hanging from hooks, frozen berries sold by the scoopful from large barrels, frozen vegetables in bins that look like they contain colorful rocks. Everything is absolutely frozen solid, will remain frozen solid, and will be carried home frozen solid to customers' own cold rooms or underhouse freezers. One vendor, an older woman named Tatiana who speaks no English but communicates enthusiastically through Sasha, specializes in frozen fish. She's got dozens of varieties, all caught locally, all flash frozen naturally in the open air. She picks up a massive frozen pike and holds it up like a trophy, saying something that makes Sasha laugh. She says this fish was swimming 2 days ago, Sasha translates. Caught through ice, frozen within hours. Look at the eyes, still clear. That means very fresh before freezing. Bad vendors sell fish that was old before freezing. You can tell by the eyes and the smell. Even frozen, good fish smells clean. Tatiana thunks the frozen pike back onto her display. It lands with a solid crack and picks up a smaller fish, showing you the gills. Even frozen, you can see they're bright red, indicating the fish was in good health when caught. She's giving you a masterclass in frozen fish quality assessment, all without sharing a common language beyond the universal language of food expertise. The meat section is equally fascinating. Whole frozen reindeer haunches, frozen horse ribs, frozen beef, frozen chicken, all displayed openly in minus 55 degrees Celsius air that's colder than any commercial freezer. There's no concern about food safety, no worry about bacteria or spoilage. The cold is absolute zero for microorganisms. Food can sit here for days, weeks even, with no deterioration. A butcher named Alexei, a mountain of a man who apparently finds minus 55 degrees Celsius to be refreshing, demonstrates his technique for cutting frozen meat. He uses a band saw that's been modified for extreme cold, but more interesting is how he uses the frozen state to his advantage. Frozen meat cuts cleaner, Sasha translates. No ragged edges, no mess. You get exact portions, perfect slices. Then customer takes home, thaws however they want, cooks however they want. He shows you various cuts. Frozen steaks that look like they've been laser cut, frozen stew meat in perfect cubes, frozen ground meat pressed into blocks. Everything is geometrically precise in a way that's hard to achieve with fresh meat. The frozen state becomes a tool for better butchery. There's a vendor selling exclusively frozen dumplings, pelmeni, a staple of Russian and Siberian cuisine. These are homemade by the vendor and her family, frozen immediately after forming, and sold by weight. She's got dozens of varieties: traditional pork and beef, fish pelmeni, mushroom pelmeni for vegetarians, even experimental flavors like reindeer and wild garlic. Each variety is in its own container, frozen solid, ready to be boiled directly from frozen at home. Pelmeni are perfect frozen food, Sasha explains. Better frozen than fresh, actually. The freezing makes the dough texture better when you cook them. Every Yakut household makes huge batches in autumn, hundreds, thousands of pelmeni, and freezes them. Then all winter you have quick meals. Just boil frozen pelmeni for 7 minutes, add butter and sour cream, done. You watch customers shopping, and the process is distinctly different from grocery shopping anywhere else. People are bundled like Arctic explorers, making quick decisions because you can't linger outside in these temperatures. They point at items, vendors weigh or count them, everything gets bagged quickly, and customers hurry off to the next stall or back to their cars. The entire market has an urgency driven by cold. Nobody's browsing leisurely. But there's also community here. Vendors and regular customers clearly know each other, calling out greetings, exchanging brief jokes that create puffs of crystallized breath. Tatiana asks Elena something, and they have a brief conversation that Sasha translates. She's asking if our cellar vegetables are lasting well this year. My mother says yes, very well, almost no waste. Tatiana says her sister's cellar had moisture problems and lost some potatoes. My mother offers advice about ventilation. It's the kind of conversation that could happen at any farmer's market anywhere, except it's happening in temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in 15 minutes, and it's about optimizing permafrost food storage rather than crop rotation. The berry vendor's stall is particularly beautiful. Barrels full of frozen cloudberries glowing like little suns, frozen blueberries so dark they're almost black, frozen cranberries in shades from deep red to burgundy. These were all foraged from the taiga during the brief summer, frozen immediately, and they'll keep their nutritional value and flavor until spring. The vendor, a younger man named Yuri who speaks some English, explains that wild berries are superior to cultivated ones for freezing. Wild berries have more intensity. He searches for the word. They grow in harsh conditions, short season, so flavor is concentrated. When you freeze them at minus 40 degrees Celsius or colder, flavor locks in perfectly, better than any cultivated berry from warm climates. He offers you a sample, a frozen cloudberry. You pop it in your mouth and it's like eating a tiny frozen jewel that tastes of honey and flowers and summer all at once. The berry is so cold it makes your teeth ache, but the flavor is extraordinary. You buy a half kilo immediately. There's also a section of the market selling frozen ready-made dishes. Frozen soups in blocks that you can break pieces off for single servings, frozen pierogi, stuffed pastries, frozen blini, thin pancakes, frozen casseroles. It's like a precursor to the modern frozen food industry, except everything was made by local families rather than factories, and the freezing happens via environment rather than industrial freezers. Historians have documented that frozen food commerce in Siberia dates back centuries, though it really expanded during the Soviet era when Yakuts grew into a proper city. But the principle is ancient. When you live in a natural freezer, you develop an economy around frozen goods. No need for expensive refrigerated transport trucks. Everything is frozen at point of sale and stays frozen until use. One fascinating detail: the market has unofficial quality standards enforced by reputation rather than regulation. Vendors who sell old fish or poor quality meat quickly lose customers to competitors, so there's strong incentive to maintain freshness and quality. Tatiana's clear fish eyes and bright gills aren't just about pride. They're about competitive advantage in a market where customers know how to judge frozen food quality. You wander to a stall selling frozen dairy products. Blocks of frozen butter, frozen sour cream cut into chunks, frozen tvorog, farmer's cheese, and even frozen milk sold in solid cylindrical blocks. The vendor explains through Sasha that different dairy products freeze differently. Milk can separate and needs to be stirred when thawed, but sour cream and butter freeze beautifully and actually develop interesting textures. My grandmother always froze butter in September, Sasha says. Summer butter from grass-fed cows, frozen in blocks. She said frozen butter kept for years if stored properly. Not that we ever kept it that long, we always used it within one winter. But theoretically, in permafrost cellar, butter could last indefinitely. The idea of butter aging like wine in a permafrost cellar is both absurd and perfectly logical for Yakutia. Why not? The conditions are stable, the temperature is constant, and fats preserve well in extreme cold. You could theoretically be eating butter that was churned decades ago, perfectly preserved in frozen time. There's a vendor selling frozen bread. Yes, bread, and this requires some explanation. The bread is baked fresh, then immediately frozen, and customers buy it frozen to store at home. When you want bread, you thaw it gradually near the stove, and apparently it reconstitutes to near fresh quality. The vendor demonstrates by breaking a frozen loaf. It snaps like wood, and then showing a thawed loaf from this morning that looks and smells freshly baked. Frozen bread is Soviet innovation that actually worked, Sasha explains. Bakeries can make large batches, freeze them, distribute them, and people have fresh bread all winter. Before this, making bread in winter was difficult. Dough doesn't rise well in cold. Ovens use a lot of fuel. But freeze-thaw bread solved the problem. You buy a frozen loaf because how can you not? It's handed to you wrapped in paper, and it feels like you're carrying a club. By the time you get it home and thaw it, Sasha promises, it'll be soft and delicious. The market tour concludes with a visit to the modern section, a small indoor area that actually has electricity. Somehow this building has power while the residential areas don't, and sells non-frozen goods, flour, sugar, tea, spices, canned goods. It's warm inside, maybe 15 degrees Celsius, and after an hour in minus 55 degrees Celsius, it feels tropical. You're instantly too warm in all your layers and start sweating. This is the problem with indoor markets, Sasha says. You're dressed for outside, then you go inside and you overheat. Then you go back outside and you're sweaty, which is dangerous. Wet clothes mean hypothermia. So you have to be very careful about how long you stay indoors. It's another example of how the cold dictates every aspect of life here. Even shopping requires strategic planning around thermal management. Back in Dimitri's car with your purchases, frozen fish, frozen berries, frozen bread, frozen dumplings, you ask Sasha if this market-based frozen food system exists anywhere else. She thinks about it. Maybe in other parts of Siberia? Mongolia, perhaps? But I think Yakutia has perfected it because our cold is most extreme and most reliable. Other places have winter, but we have eternal winter. It's almost a boast, this claim to the title of coldest inhabited place, and you're starting to understand why. In a harsh environment, you take pride in whatever achievements are possible. We survive where others cannot. We turn cold into advantage. We make frozen fish taste better than fresh fish anywhere else. It's identity forged in ice. The drive back takes you past some of Yakutsk's more modern developments. Soviet-era apartment blocks, newer commercial buildings, even a shopping mall that looks surreally normal except for the fact that it's on stilts and surrounded by ice fog. The contrast between the traditional market you just left and these modern structures is striking. Different eras of development, different philosophies of living in extreme cold, all coexisting. Yakutsk is strange city, Sasha muses. We have internet, universities, modern life. But also we have permafrost cellars and stroganina and traditions that are thousands of years old. Sometimes I feel like we're living in multiple centuries at once. It's an astute observation. The Ivanov household is a perfect example. Wood-burning stove from 1967 sitting next to a modern electric refrigerator, currently non-functional. Traditional frozen fish preparation happening while someone checks their smartphone, ancient knowledge and modern convenience intertwined. When you arrive home, the electricity is still out, but Elena has prepared a full lunch using only the stove and ingredients from the cold room. There's hot soup that's been simmering for hours, fresh bread, thawed from frozen stock, butter, also thawed from frozen, and tea. The meal is served by candlelight, and it's unexpectedly romantic. If you ignore the part where it's mid-afternoon and darker than twilight outside. Power will come back, Victor says philosophically. Always does. Meanwhile, we eat, we stay warm, we tell stories. This is old way of passing winter. Before electricity, before anything, we had fire and food and each other. Still enough. And somehow it is enough. The stove radiates heat. The food is delicious. The candles create dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the city struggles with its power outage, but inside this kitchen, life continues exactly as it would have 100 years ago. The frozen vegetables in the cold room don't care if there's electricity. The permafrost cellar functions independently of the grid. The survival systems that matter most are the ones that don't require infrastructure beyond fire and ice. You're learning that cooking with frozen vegetables in Yakutia isn't just a technique. It's a philosophy of resilience, a way of life that acknowledges environmental reality while refusing to be defeated by it. And increasingly, it seems like wisdom the whole world might need to remember. The electricity returns that evening with a flicker and a hum, and there's a collective cheer from somewhere in the neighborhood. You can hear it through the walls. But the celebration is muted because everyone knows the power could fail again tomorrow, next week, or in 5 minutes. You learn to appreciate modern conveniences while never fully trusting them, at least not in minus 55 degrees Celsius darkness. With power restored, Sasha suggests showing you something that bridges the traditional and modern approaches to frozen food. Her friend Katia, who runs a small home-based business making frozen convenience foods using traditional recipes. It's a glimpse into how Yakut culinary culture is adapting to contemporary life without abandoning the principles that have sustained people here for generations. Katia lives in a newer apartment building, still on stilts, still fighting the same permafrost challenges. But her kitchen is a fascinating hybrid space. There's a modern electric stove, backup gas burner, because of course, a large chest freezer, supplemented by the balcony, which at minus 55 degrees Celsius is colder than any freezer setting, and racks of prepared frozen meals in various stages of completion. She's essentially running a cottage industry that supplies working families who don't have time for Elena's all-day cooking sessions. Problem with modern Yakutsk life, Katia explains in surprisingly good English, is people work jobs now, not farming or herding. They leave house at 8 a.m., come home at 7 p.m., no time for traditional cooking, but they still want traditional food, food that connects to culture. So, I make it for them, freeze it, deliver it frozen. She shows you her current production. Containers of frozen borscht portion for single servings, frozen pelmeni made with reindeer meat and traditional spices, frozen stroganina already sliced and packed for quick serving, frozen salamat that just needs reheating. Each item is prepared according to traditional methods but packaged for modern convenience. The key is understanding frozen food science. Katia says, warming to her topic. She's clearly passionate about this. Not all foods freeze equally well. Soups with high fat content, perfect. Dumplings, excellent. Dishes with a lot of dairy that might separate, tricky, need special techniques. I spent 2 years experimenting, learning what works. She opens her chest freezer, and it's organized with an efficiency that would make a professional chef weep with joy. Everything is labeled with content and freeze date, arranged by type, easily accessible. Commercial frozen food industry knows this stuff, she says, but they use chemicals, preservatives, stabilizers. I don't need these. I use cold, real cold, minus 40 degrees Celsius, minus 50 degrees Celsius, which preserves better than any chemical. It's the same principle Elena uses, scaled up and systematized. Flash freezing at extreme temperatures creates small ice crystals, preserving cellular structure and flavor. The difference is that Katia is doing it commercially, building a business around Yakut frozen food traditions. My babushka thinks I'm crazy, Katia laughs. She says, why buy frozen food? Just make it yourself. But her generation had time. My customers are doctors, teachers, office workers. They come home tired. They don't want to spend 3 hours preparing dinner. They want 15 minutes, heat and eat. So, I give them traditional food in modern format. She demonstrates her packaging system. Compostable containers, minimal plastic, everything designed to go from freezer to stove or microwave with no waste. I'm trying to be environmentally responsible, she says. Yakutia is changing, climate change is real, we're seeing it. Warmer winters, later freezes, earlier thaws. So I think about sustainability, not just convenience. It's a sobering reminder that even the coldest inhabited place on Earth isn't immune to global warming. Sasha mentions that permafrost is thawing in some areas, causing buildings to sink and roads to buckle. The reliable deep freeze that Yakut culture has depended on for millennia might not be quite as reliable in the coming decades. But for now, Katia says, gesturing to her balcony where today's production is freezing in the open air. I use what nature gives. Free freezing, perfect temperature, no electricity cost. In summer, I'll use the chest freezer more. In winter, the world is my freezer. She's prepared samples for you to try. Her reindeer pelmeni, which need to be boiled directly from frozen. She drops them into boiling water, and exactly 7 minutes later, they're done. Puffy little dumplings that she serves with sour cream and fresh dill. The dill is frozen from summer, naturally. The filling is rich and slightly gamey, seasoned with pepper and garlic, and the dough has that perfect chewy tender texture that good pelmeni achieve. Reindeer is traditional meat here, Katia explains. Leaner than beef, healthier, more sustainable. Reindeer herders are indigenous to Yakutia, and buying their meat supports traditional livelihoods. So, my business helps preserve culture in 2 ways. Traditional food, traditional economy. It's a thoughtful approach to commerce, and you wonder if this model, hyperlocal, culturally rooted, environmentally adapted, might be more resilient than the globalized food system that supplies most modern cities. Katia's business would survive supply chain disruptions because her suppliers are within 100 kilometers. It would survive power outages because most of her freezing happens naturally. It's simultaneously ancient and futuristic. She shows you her quality control process. Every batch of food gets tested by a small group of volunteer tasters, mostly family and friends, who judge it against traditional preparations. If my grandmother says the borscht isn't right, I don't sell it, Katia says firmly. I can't compete with supermarkets on price, so I compete on quality and authenticity. People pay more for food that tastes like home. There's a fascinating economic dynamic at play. Industrial frozen food, fish sticks, frozen pizzas, international brands, is available in Yakutsk supermarkets, shipped in at great expense and sold at premium prices. But Katia's local frozen foods are actually cheaper while being higher quality because she's eliminated the expensive refrigerated supply chain. The extreme cold is her competitive advantage. Yakutia should be frozen food capital of the world, she says with conviction. We have perfect natural conditions, traditional knowledge, local ingredients. But most people don't know about Yakut cuisine. They know Siberia is cold, but they don't know we've turned cold into culinary asset. I want to change that. She's been working on a website. She shows you gorgeous photography of frozen landscapes, traditional dishes, the market stalls. She's documenting recipes, filming cooking tutorials, building an online presence. Someday, maybe I export Yakut frozen foods internationally, she dreams. People in New York, London, Tokyo eating stroganina and thinking, wow, this is amazing. Why not? Why not, indeed? If Scandinavian cuisine can become globally fashionable, if Peruvian food can take over fine dining, why not Yakut frozen specialties? The challenge is the same one indigenous cuisines everywhere face: being taken seriously instead of dismissed as primitive or exotic curiosity. Before you leave, Katia packs a care package. Several containers of her frozen meals for you to try over the coming days. Tell me honest feedback, she insists. I want to know, can foreigner appreciate this food? Or is it too specific to Yakut taste? Back at the Ivanov house, Elena is amused by the frozen convenience foods. She examines them with professional interest, reading the labels in Russian and Yakut, checking the freeze quality. She says something that makes Sasha laugh. My mother says Katia's borscht looks good, maybe better than her own. But don't tell Katia. She'll get big head. That night's dinner is a hybrid. Some of Elena's traditional cooking, frozen vegetables from the cellar, slowly thawed and transformed, alongside one of Katia's frozen meals. Reindeer stew that reheats beautifully, maintaining texture and flavor. The stew is excellent, rich and warming, the meat tender, the sauce thick with root vegetables and herbs. It's almost indistinguishable from scratch-made, which is exactly the point. This is future of Yakut food, Sasha says thoughtfully, respecting tradition but adapting to modern life. My generation, we work jobs, we have less time, but we still want connection to culture. Katia understands this. She's building a bridge between my mother's world and mine. Victor, who's been mostly quiet during dinner, offers his perspective. In my father's time, everyone knew how to hunt, fish, prepare food traditional way. In my time, some people know, some people don't. In your generation, he gestures to Sasha, maybe very few know. So, people like Katia, people who preserve knowledge and make it accessible, they're important. They keep culture alive even when lifestyle changes. It's a poignant observation about cultural continuity in the face of modernization. The skills Elena possesses, knowing exactly how to thaw frozen vegetables, how to plane stroganina, how to manage a permafrost cellar, could easily be lost within a generation or two if nobody bothers to maintain them. Katia's business, in its way, is cultural preservation through commercial adaptation. The conversation shifts to climate change and what it might mean for traditional food systems. Mikhail, who works in environmental monitoring, has concerning data. Average winter temperatures in Yakutsk have risen about 2 degrees Celsius over the past 30 years. Doesn't sound like much, except when you're operating at the extreme edge of habitability. Small changes matter enormously. Permafrost is thawing deeper each summer, he explains. Some cellars are having problems. Some buildings are sinking because the ground underneath isn't as stable. And the freeze dates are later, October instead of September, which affects harvest storage timing. It's a sobering reminder that even the most extreme cold environments aren't immune to global trends. The Yakut approach to frozen foods has worked for millennia because the cold was reliable, predictable, extreme. If that changes, if winters become merely very cold instead of deadly cold, if the permafrost thaws, if freeze-thaw cycles become unstable, the entire system could collapse. But humans adapt, Elena says firmly, through Sasha's translation. We've survived worse. Ice ages, wars, collectivization, industrialization. We'll adapt to warming too. Maybe we use technology more, maybe we change methods. But we won't forget. Knowledge stays, even when conditions change. It's resilience talking, the same resilience that got people through every previous crisis. And you realize that's the real lesson of cooking with frozen vegetables in Yakutia. It's not just about the specific techniques, though those are fascinating. It's about the mindset, the determination to thrive in harsh conditions, the creativity to turn limitations into advantages, the wisdom to preserve what works while adapting to what changes. The evening ends with tea and conversation. as evenings here do. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 57 degrees Celsius. A new low for this cold snap. Records might be broken tonight. But inside, the stove burns, the walls hold, and another day of successful defiance comes to a close. Tomorrow, Sasha promises you'll learn about the psychology of eating in extreme cold. How the environment shapes not just what you eat and how you prepare it, but why food takes on such profound significance when survival itself feels like a daily negotiation with forces that want you dead. The morning arrives with news that the cold snap has indeed broken a record. Minus 58 degrees Celsius overnight, the coldest temperature recorded in Yakutsk in 15 years. There's a strange pride in this announcement, broadcast on the local radio that crackles to life in the kitchen. "We are the champions of cold," the radio announcer jokes in Russian. "Moscow thinks they have winter? We laugh at Moscow winter." It's gallows humor, but it's also genuine pride. When your environment is this hostile, you claim victories where you can find them. Yes, it's colder than a frozen hell out there, but we're still here. We're still cooking breakfast, still drinking tea, still very much alive despite temperatures that should preclude human habitation. Elena is making oladyi this morning, small fluffy pancakes that are a Russian breakfast staple. But with a Yakutian twist, the batter includes frozen berries that she's folded in while still frozen. They'll thaw during cooking, releasing tart juice that swirls through the pancakes, creating marbled patterns of red and purple. Food in extreme cold becomes more than just nutrition, Sasha says, settling into what's clearly going to be a philosophical conversation. It becomes comfort, proof of civilization, resistance against the void outside. When it's minus 58 degrees Celsius and dark and you've been inside for days because it's too dangerous to go out, a good meal is everything. It's proof that you're human, not just a survival machine. She's articulating something you've been feeling but couldn't quite name: the psychological weight that food carries in this environment. Every meal is a small victory, a defiance of the cold that wants to reduce you to frozen carbon. The act of cooking, transforming frozen ingredients into hot, delicious food, is almost ritualistic, a daily reassertion of human agency. Elena flips the pancakes, and the smell fills the kitchen. Caramelizing batter, sweet tart berries, butter crisping the edges. It's sensory richness in an environment that's sensorially deprived. Outside is white and gray and black, silent except for wind, cold enough to numb sensation. But inside, there's color and aroma and warmth. Food becomes the antidote to environmental austerity. My grandmother used to say, Sasha continues, that winter hunger isn't just about empty stomach. This hunger for color, for variety, for proof that the world isn't just white and cold. That's why frozen summer vegetables are so important, psychologically. In February you eat carrots that are orange, beets that are red, berries that are purple. You remember, color exists, warmth exists, summer happened and will happen again. It's food as memory, as hope, as psychological survival tool. The frozen vegetables aren't just calories. They're temporal bridges, physical evidence that the world wasn't always this way and won't always be this way. Victor joins the conversation, adding his perspective. In Soviet times, there were studies about psychological health in Yakutia. High rates of depression, especially in winter, darkness, cold, isolation. But they found people who maintained traditional food practices, who hunted, fished, prepared traditional dishes, had better mental health outcomes. The researchers didn't understand why at first. Then they realized traditional food connects you to culture, to ancestors, to land. It gives meaning beyond just survival. It's a profound observation backed by modern psychology. Cultural continuity, traditional practices, connection to place. These aren't luxuries, they're psychological necessities, especially in extreme environments. When you eat stroganina prepared the way your great-grandmother prepared it, you're not alone in the cold. You're part of an unbroken chain of humans who faced the same cold and prevailed. The pancakes are ready, and Elena serves them with sour cream and a drizzle of honey. The berries have created pockets of intense tartness that contrast beautifully with the sweet honey and rich cream. You eat slowly, savoring, and you notice everyone else does too. Nobody's rushing through this meal. Food is too important to rush. There's another psychological aspect, Sasha says between bites. Food preparation gives structure to time. In winter, when every day is dark and cold and basically the same, you need markers, you need rhythm. So morning, you make breakfast. Afternoon, you start preparing dinner. Evening, you eat together. Night, you plan tomorrow's meals. Start thawing tomorrow's ingredients. Food creates a daily cycle that keeps you oriented in time. Without these markers, she explains, winter could become a formless blur of darkness and cold. But the discipline of 3 meals a day, the anticipation of special dishes, the planning required for thawing and preparation, all of this creates temporal structure that helps maintain sanity. You think about modern life, where food is often an afterthought, something grabbed between meetings or eaten while scrolling through phones. The intentionality here is completely different. Food demands attention, requires planning, creates community. It's not background noise. It's the main event. After breakfast, Sasha suggests a visit to her friend Daria, a psychologist who specializes in treating seasonal affective disorder and has studied the relationship between traditional food practices and mental health in extreme climates. It's an opportunity to understand the science behind what you've been experiencing intuitively. Daria's office is in a modern building downtown, warm and well-lit with full-spectrum lamps designed to combat the vitamin D deficiency and circadian disruption that comes with 4 hours of weak daylight. She's a woman in her 40s with a quick smile and the direct manner of someone who's heard every excuse and rationalization human psychology can produce. Extreme cold creates extreme psychological stress. She begins, settling into professional mode. Isolation, darkness, the constant threat of the environment, the inability to go outside freely. All of this activates stress responses. Cortisol increases, serotonin decreases, dopamine regulation becomes problematic. Clinically, about 40% of Yakutians show depressive symptoms during deep winter. But, she continues, traditional food practices serve as a powerful protective factor. When we study people who maintain traditional diets and preparation methods versus those who rely primarily on imported processed foods, we see significant differences in mental health outcomes. The traditional food group shows lower depression rates, better stress resilience, higher reported life satisfaction. The mechanisms are multiple, she explains. First, there's the omega-3 fatty acids from fish, which are crucial for brain health. Second, the high-fat traditional diet provides the calories needed for neurotransmitter production in cold climates. Third, the nutrient density of traditional foods, organ meats, wild berries, fermented products, provides micronutrients often lacking in modern diets. But beyond biochemistry, Daria says, there's the psychological and social aspects. Traditional food preparation is time-consuming, yes? This time investment creates mindfulness, gives purpose, provides daily structure. And traditional meals are almost always communal. You don't eat stroganina alone, you eat with family, with friends. This enforced social connection is protective against isolation and depression. She shows you data from her research, graphs comparing mental health metrics between different populations in Yakutsk. The patterns are clear. People who maintain strong connections to traditional food culture show measurably better psychological resilience. There's also something we call environmental mastery, Daria continues. The feeling that you can control and manage your environment rather than being controlled by it. When you successfully preserve vegetables through winter, when you prepare traditional dishes, when you use the cold as a tool rather than just enduring it, this creates sense of agency. Agency is protective against learned helplessness and depression. It's the same principle psychologists have identified in other contexts. People who feel they have control over their circumstances cope better with stress than those who feel helpless. The traditional Yakut approach to food isn't just about eating. It's about mastering an environment that seems hostile to human life. Interestingly, Daria says, we're seeing younger generation lose some of this resilience. People who grow up eating mostly imported foods, who don't learn traditional preparation methods, who think of frozen vegetables as inferior to fresh, they show higher rates of winter depression. They've lost the cultural knowledge that protects against environmental stress. It's cultural knowledge as medicine, tradition as mental health intervention. And it's being lost in the transition to modern urban life, with measurable psychological consequences. You ask about solutions and Daria is thoughtful. I actually recommend to my patients, learn to cook traditional foods, not as nostalgia trip, but as therapeutic intervention. Learn to prepare stroganina, learn to manage permafrost cellar, learn to thaw vegetables properly. The skills themselves, the attention, the patience, the connection to culture, these are therapeutic. She's essentially prescribing what Elena does naturally, engagement with traditional food practices as a form of psychological self-care. There's also the anticipation factor, Daria adds. Traditional food preparation requires planning ahead. You must start thawing yesterday for today's meal. You must preserve in October for February's eating. This future orientation, this ability to delay gratification and plan ahead, correlates strongly with psychological resilience and life satisfaction. It's the opposite of modern instant gratification culture, and according to Daria's research, it's significantly better for mental health. The conversation shifts to climate change and what warming temperatures might mean psychologically. If traditional food systems collapse due to unreliable freezing, we could see mental health crisis, Daria says bluntly. These practices aren't just quaint traditions. They're psychological scaffolding that helps people survive extreme environment. Remove the scaffolding, and mental health deteriorates. It's a sobering thought. Climate change is not just environmental or economic threat, but psychological one, potentially undermining the cultural practices that have sustained mental health for generations. Back at the Ivanov house that evening, you share what you learned with the family. Elena nods knowingly. She may not have the scientific vocabulary, but she understands intuitively what Daria explained clinically. Food is medicine for soul, not just body, she says through Sasha's translation. My mother knew this, her mother knew this. You can eat pills and be alive, but you cannot be well without good food prepared with care. It's folk wisdom validated by modern psychology, and you're struck by how often that pattern has emerged during your time here. Traditional practices that seem simple or superstitious turn out to have solid scientific foundations. Tonight's dinner is special. Elena has prepared a feast to celebrate your final night with the family. There's koyin, frozen horse meat prepared as stroganina, which Victor claims is the finest version of the dish. There's indijurka, the frozen fish salad. There's borscht made with carefully thawed vegetables that taste remarkably fresh despite being frozen for 4 months. There's homemade pelmeni boiled to perfection. And for dessert, kerchek with cloudberries and a drizzle of honey. But before the meal begins, there's a small ceremony. Elena brings out a special dish, frozen berries from last summer, but not just any berries. These are the first berries her granddaughter, Sasha's niece, picked during her first berry foraging trip. They've been preserved specifically for a special occasion, and that occasion is now. In Yakut tradition, Sasha explains, first berries of the season are sacred. They represent continuation, child learning traditional knowledge, connecting to land, becoming part of culture. My mother saved these for moment that matters. You being here, learning our ways, this matters. The berries are passed around, each person taking just a few. They're frozen still, tiny jewels of concentrated summer flavor. When you bite into one, it's like tasting time itself. Last July's sunshine released in February's darkness. It's more than food. It's communion, connection, continuity. The meal proceeds with laughter and stories. Victor tells about ice fishing disasters. Mikhail shares office gossip. Elena describes her plans for next summer's garden. Sasha talks about her work teaching Yakut language to elementary school students. The conversation flows around the table like a warm current, and you realize this gathering, this sharing of food and stories, this is what survival actually looks like in minus 58 degrees Celsius darkness. It's not just about staying alive. It's about staying human, about maintaining culture and connection and meaning despite environmental extremity. The frozen vegetables on your plate represent summer's labor. The stroganina represents ancestral knowledge. The kerchek represents hope and sweetness preserved through darkness. Every bite is weighted with significance beyond nutrition. As the meal winds down and the inevitable tea service begins, you reflect on everything you've learned. The technical skills, how to thaw vegetables, how to plane frozen fish, how to manage permafrost storage. the cultural knowledge, the importance of traditional foods, the pride in extreme cold adaptation, the psychological insights, how food creates structure and meaning in harsh environments. But more than anything, you've learned about resilience. Not the dramatic, heroic kind, but the daily, unglamorous kind. The resilience of getting up every morning when it's minus 50 degrees Celsius outside, feeding the stove, starting the thaw process for tonight's dinner, maintaining the rhythms and rituals that keep you grounded. The resilience of preserving cultural knowledge in the face of modernization. The resilience of finding joy and beauty in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. You understand now? Elena asks, and though she speaks through Sasha, you understand the question directly. Do you understand why we live this way? Why we maintain these traditions? Why we don't just move somewhere warmer and easier? You nod and you do understand. This isn't just about survival, it's about identity, about being Yakut, about refusing to let environmental extremity erase your culture or your humanity. It's about looking at minus 58 degrees Celsius darkness and saying, we will not merely survive, we will feast. The evening continues with more tea, more conversation, more warmth shared against the cold. Outside, the wind picks up and the temperature continues its deadly descent. But inside, surrounded by the fruits of summer labor transformed through winter preservation, gathered around a table with people who've mastered the art of thriving where others would perish, you've never felt warmer. Wind down begins. And as the night deepens and the candles burn lower and the conversation softens to murmurs, you feel yourself drifting into that warm, satisfied state that comes after a good meal shared with good people. The stove crackles gently, its fire burning down to coals that will be fed again in the morning, continuing the cycle that sustained this household and this culture through countless winters. You think about those frozen vegetables waiting in the cold room, holding summer's promise in suspension. You think about the permafrost cellars extending deep into the earth, ancient storage technology still functioning perfectly in the modern age. You think about all the families across Yakutia performing these same rituals, thawing, preparing, gathering, eating, creating pockets of warmth and humanity in the frozen vastness. The cold outside is absolute, unrelenting, indifferent to human desire or survival. But inside, there is food and fire and family. There is tradition and adaptation. There is memory and hope intertwined in every carefully thawed vegetable, every slice of frozen fish, every spoonful of whipped frozen cream. This is what it means to cook at minus 58 degrees Celsius. This is what it means to live at the edge of the habitable world. This is what it means to be human, fully human, in the face of extremity. And as sleep begins to find you, warm under layers of wool and down, belly full of food that traveled through time from summer to winter, you carry with you this final understanding that resilience isn't about never feeling cold or hunger or darkness. It's about maintaining warmth, nourishment, and light anyway. It's about the daily choice to thaw frozen vegetables with patience, to prepare meals with care, to gather together despite the void outside, and to say, through the simple act of eating well, we are here, we persist, we thrive. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in Yakutia, a stove is being fed, vegetables are slowly thawing for tomorrow's meal, and the ancient dance between cold and warmth, preservation and transformation, continues as it has for thousands of years and will for thousands more.